I tried, he replied. But you are right. It is a tangled web we have had to weave together, Theon. I am both your gaoler and, in some respects, your father. Your life was forfeit if your father rebelled again. But I have raised you alongside my children, I have had you sit at our table, take lessons with my sons and teach them weapons. I have sometimes failed to tread the line and I am truly sorry for any harm that has caused you. Any pain. It was not my wish. Theon flushed and turned to glance out the window. That you have addressed it and been open with me about the wars to come, it means a lot, Lord Stark. You did not need to show such trust in me. I would pick House Stark, if you would have me. The mistake was mine to offer apologies for, he returned. I must ask that you no longer call me Lord Stark, unless we are in company, or sir. I will not presume to ask you to call me father, despite your choice today, you are still a Greyjoy. I would not presume to take your father's place. But you may call me Eddard, or Ned, when we are around family or in certain situations. I barely remember my father, Theon said quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor and posture hunched. If you would let me, I would name you father and I would fight by your side in the wars to come. He felt a smile wash over his face as all the tension left his body. And I would name you son, Theon. ****. Later that day he watched, from his place on the high table, as Lord Willers and Lady Margaery entertained Bran and Rickon with stories from Highgarden. The group were seated on one of the lower tables in the Great Hall, rather than on the high table, with his two youngest children. Lady Margaery and Lord Willers had yet to have even a morsel of their food. The conversation was loud and boisterous, with Lady Margaery laughing so hard at one point that he was sure he saw tears in her eyes. Nearby, Gendry, Theon and Robb were huddled together, heads bent and speaking lowly, although every now and then Robb would glance over towards his betrothed and flush a bright red whenever his eyes met hers. Lady Margaery likes Rickon and Bran, Sansa said quietly, breaking him out of his contemplation. She will do well here. It is not a match I would have thought would work, father, but I truly think they will both be happy. I had thought that Robb would wed a daughter of the North, he replied. After marrying a southerner myself, I thought my son should marry in the North, particularly after I betrothed you to Joffrey. You think the Northern Lords will not be happy? Oh, they will be furious, he returned, tearing his eyes away from Lady Margaery to look at Sansa, who was watching him carefully. You will need to betroth some of your children to the sons and daughters of your lords, Sansa said, her face carefully blank. You did say you did not wish to leave the North, he said cautiously. A match in the North, it would help, Sansa. As he watched, her eyes darted past him to the part of the table where Gendry, Theon and Robb sat, then she flushed and looked away. I see. She flushed deeper and murmured, I will do as you wish though, father. He snorted. Do not use that line with me, Sansa. I know you will do what I ask. You have always been the least difficult of all your siblings. But I, more than anyone, knows what can happen when a woman is forced into a match they do not want, he replied. Then he heaved out a large sigh. That is the match you wish for? Yes, she said. He is a good man. I know he is a bastard, but he is still the oldest heir of Roberts that we know of. That does mean something, father. He would be pleased to stay here, and I could stay here, and we would not be beholden to the same constraints we would be elsewhere. He was silent for a moment, marveling at how much Sansa had changed and grown over the past moons. Not only did she look older, holding herself straighter and filling out, she acted older, engaging in politics, letting go of her differences with her sister. There had been a stage where he feared she might never take to the North, or to House Stark, the way her siblings had. Yet here she was, advocating for a match with a bastard boy, not only so she could stay in the North but, also, he realized, to give them leverage over House Baratheon. That they got on well was clearly the final nudge she had needed to make such a request. Your mother will not be happy, he said eventually. I will speak to mother. This is your wish. It is. And his wishes. Have you spoken to him of this? She flushed and looked away. He sighed again. I will speak to him before we march south, when I tell him of his father. You are too young to be wed though. It will have to wait until after the war if he agrees. Do not force him, she whispered. Only if he is happy. You realize this means that Rickon and Bran will have no choice now but to marry in the North, he said, turning to look at her head on. Who would you suggest? At her stunned look he chuckled. You have proven yourself to be adept at politics, Sangza. Tell me your thoughts. She chewed on her lip for a moment. Rukan and one of the Mormont girls, I think mother said Lady Mage's youngest is only a few days older than him. He would do well there, and the Mormonts are loyal. We do not know if Bran can have children, and if he cannot then I am not sure a match would be wise. I agree, he said. Mayhaps the two eldest children of Robb and Lady Margaery to House Karstark and House Umber. Her eyes flashed up to him. That will be years, father. Surely you cannot mean to make promises for children that do not yet exist, she said quietly. Then she dropped her voice and said, barely above a whisper, that might never exist if the gods are not kind. That, Sangza, is politics. It is how your mother would suggest we proceed, he replied. I do not like it, but it would be the best way, and Robb will understand. And Lady Margaery? He glanced back towards Lady Margaery, who held Rukan in her lap as the boy whispered in her ear. Jam was spreading all over her hair, for his son appeared to have managed to wear his evening meal instead of swallowing it, but she seemed not to mind. I do not think she will object. She is a Tyrell. She will understand this is the way of the world. Very well, Sangza said quietly, making to rise. She paused, then she bent down and kissed his cheek. Thank you, father. 298 AC, Jon Snow. It took slightly over a week for Winterfell to appear on the horizon after he left Greywater Watch. Beneath him he could feel winter tense as the castle came into sight and then relax when it became clear there was no army camped outside. As they had flown over the north, over Castle Sewin, he had seen the signs of men moving in formation. His father had called his banners. Hojan's dreams had been right, not that Jon ever truly thought they weren't, but he had hoped. Only a fool longed for war. They had sped up their flight since then, keen to get back to Winterfell before any of his father's bannermen arrived. He had not slept in over a day. Every time he thought he was going to doze off on her back, Winter would jerk him away with a nudge from her mind and a vocal grumble. He could feel her worry through their bond that he might fall should she have to change direction suddenly. He shifted slightly on her back as he fixed his gaze on the turrets of Winterfell. He needed to know what was going on and what they planned to do rather than blundering in and being put on the spot. He just hoped he would speak to father or Robb before he saw anyone else. As they drew nearer to the castle, he saw two riders appear from out of the main gate and disappear into the maze of houses that made up Wintertown. When they reappeared, they were heading directly towards him and Winter. Another horse, riderless, cantered alongside. Next to them ran a direwolf. He smiled instinctively and guided Winter down to land half a league or so from Wintertown on the brow of a small hill just off the King's Road. He had only just slid down her body, his thighs still protesting despite the thick trousers he wore to try and avoid the chafing, when they approached. Instead of stopping, the grey wind sprinted past Winter heading down south, presumably in the direction of where his brother was. He watched as the riders drew their horses to a halt about 100 meters away. Jaqargan, he murmured to Winter, who had not moved since he had moved to stand next to her head. She nudged him in the side with her snout and huffed loudly. Jaqargan Argshagan. He felt her annoyance through the bond at being sent away. But she did as bid, taking a few steps back and unfurling her wings and then launching herself into the air and heading in the direction of the Wolf's Wood. He watched her go, feeling strangely bereft. Having spent over a week in only her company, it felt like he was losing part of himself as he watched her fly away. Once she was but a speck on the horizon, he turned his attention back to the two men in front of him and sighed. Then he began walking towards them. The second he did so, they both dismounted their horses and walked over to him. They met in the middle, and, for a moment, no one spoke. He stared at his father and brother. Robb seemed taller, holding himself with more confidence. His father the opposite, he looked exhausted and unkempt, as though all the woes of Westeros rested on his shoulders. Father. Son. He relaxed, feeling his worries melt away, and crossed the distance between himself and his father and pulled the man in for a firm hug. Father's arms wrapped tightly around him, pulling him in so close that Jon struggled to breath for a moment. Son, father murmured again, his voice choked up with emotion. They clung together for an age. Jon could hear the horses stomping their feet in agitation but paid them no mind as he clung to his father like a newborn babe. What about me? Robb said, his voice cutting through the moment between Jon and his father. Do you not plan to greet me, brother? He pulled away from his father's arms and turned to face his brother. Eventually he teased, blinking back his tears. He pulled Robb in for a firm hug and clapped him on the back. It is good to see you, brother. Robb gripped him back even harder than father had done and slapped his back. Brother. Come, we should return to Winterfell, father said, his voice quiet. Robb and I had warned those in the castle and winter town of your dragon, but they will want to know it is you before they relax. Howland told you? He asked, reaching over to grab the reins of one of the horses. Father replied. He filled us in on everything. You have me at an advantage then, father. I have no clue what has happened since I left Winterfell other than you have summoned your banners. He watched as Robb and father exchanged a long look and then both swung themselves up onto their horses. Something has happened, he said flatly. He swung himself into his saddle and settled down. Give me the essentials as ride. Fill me in on the rest later. Together they kicked their horses forward and began the slow walk back to Winterfell. I returned from King's Landing, as you can see, father began, his voice tinged with a wry note. Robert ordered the deaths of Daenerys and her unborn babe. Babe? He asked, turning to stare at his father as he rode next to him. She was married off to a Dothraki horse lord, father said, his voice turning sad. She was several moons along when the king found out. He ordered her death and that of her unborn babe. I left that day. Did he send someone? I do not know. But I imagine so, son. But you left. Because he ordered her death. Father's face turned pensive for a moment and Jon watched as his eyes darkened and turned sad. She is your family, Jon. She is your age. A child. I have made so many mistakes, so many errors. I could not make one more. He glanced away from his father. She will be fine. So, with my uncle. He could hear the sympathy in father's voice when he replied, you cannot know that, Jon. He glanced back, a soft smile on his face. Uncle Aemon sent House Velaryon a message, to go to Essos and protect my aunt and uncle. He had expected his father to scowl to chastise him for his foolish mistake. He had not expected his father to smile and say, a wise move. House Velaryon will be your staunchest supporters. He inclined his head. What else happened? As repugnant as Robert's actions towards my aunt and uncle were, I cannot see you calling your banners over it, father. The Northerners would not march for that. Robert is dead, father replied quietly. And his children, they are not his. He has no true-born children, Jon. The boy that sits on the throne is the child of Cersei and the Kingslayer. How do you know? There is a boy, at Winterfell, his father said, his voice dropping as they reached the edge of Wintertown. Gendry. He is Robert's bastard. Gods, Jon. He looks like just Robert did 6 and 10 years ago. And the children are blonde-haired and green-eyed. Like Cersei and Sir Jaime, he finished. But that is not proof, father. Lord Varys told me that if I stayed, I would die. That can surely be the only reason, and the day that Bran fell from the tower, only the Kingslayer and Cersei were there. That is still not enough to muster your banners, father. What are you not telling me? Lord Varys wrote to tell me of Robert's death, and he implied that if I went south to swear fealty to Joffrey, that I would die, father replied quietly. Catelyn has taken Tyrion Lannister hostage and the Riverlands burns because of it. Tyrion. He said, unable to keep the laugh out of his voice. What crime could Tyrion have done? Did he drink too much ale? A cat spore attacked Bran, and we believe she thinks that Tyrion Lannister sent him. He laughed. Tyrion is man of things, father, but he is no killer. I agree, Robb said quietly. It was him that fashioned a saddle for Bran so that he might ride again. That is not a man who would then try to kill him. I agree, father replied. I still cannot see the Northern Lords marching south for Lady Catelyn, he said gently. This is not their war. What happens in the Riverlands, it is not our concern. Father flushed slightly and as Jon watched his hands on the reins tightened. I cannot swear fealty to a boy born of incest between Lannisters, especially when my own son has a troll claim that he will one day press. He nearly dropped the reins in surprise. You mean to march south for me, father? If you wish to ever press your claim, son, then yes, father replied quietly. If I go south after what Caitlin has done, and what I discovered about the children, I will die. My only choice is to march south with an army to remove Joffrey from that throne, and place someone on it. You are my son, Jon. If you ever wish to press your claim, it is now. They fell silent as they passed under the south gate and entered the courtyard of Winterfell. He turned his attention back to the front and was surprised to see what appeared to be the entire household gathered there to greet him. His eyes moved over the familiar faces, Sir Roderick, the Septar, Farlin, Veon Poole, the cook, and, as he made to dismount his horse, then all dropped to their knees or curtsied, their eyes fixed to the floor. He gulped. Then finished dismounting, sliding down off his horse even as a stable boy ran forward to grasp their reins. He sucked in a deep breath, then he turned his attention to the bottom of the steps in front of the great keep. Sansa stood at the front, Rickon grasping one hand and Bran being held by Hodder next to her. No Arya. He ignored a man with a cane, dressed in green and brown, and a beautiful girl in a plunging gown of deep green and grey for a moment and instead crossed over to his siblings. They looked just as they had the last time he had seen them. Except Sansa. Her head was bent low and, even though he could not properly see her face, he could see the dark lines under her eyes, and her hair was tied up in the northern fashion, not the southern fashion she had favored before. Sister, he said quietly. You do not need to kneel before me. Her eyes darted up and he was surprised to see tears blooming in her eyes and leaking out the sides. Jon, she whispered. Then she launched herself at him, her arms wrapping around his neck even as he staggered backwards, taken aback by her weight. Brother. I am so sorry. He clenched his arms around her waist and lifted her up, so she was tightly pressed against him. There is nothing to forgive, Sansa, he whispered. But we can talk later, if you wish. She pulled back and blinked at him, then a small smile settled over her face as she said, I would like that. He nodded at her and let go of her so he might greet Bran and Rickon. Rickon rushed into his arms as he squatted down and wrapped pudgy arms around his neck even as he sniffled, trying to repress his tears. Where is Shaggy Dog? He asked. I hope you have been taking care of him. Kenel, Rickon said in a sulking voice. He glanced up at Sansa, who pursed her lips. Shaggy Dog broke into the kitchens and ate 3 hams. He grinned at Rickon and ruffled his brother's hair. He's a good boy. Rickon pulled back and grinned at him. Finally, he turned to Bran. Hodder lowered his arms so that Bran could be dropped down slightly until he was eye level with Jon. Brother, he said, pulling Bran's head towards his chest. Ow. Jon, I'm not a child. Bran squawked, even though he wrapped his own arms around Jon's neck. I know. I am just pleased to see you, he replied. There was a polite throat cleaning and he pulled away from Bran and turned his eyes to Sansa. Jon, brother, let me introduce you to our guests, Sansa said, lightly wrapping her hand around his arm and steering him slightly more forcefully than was truly necessary towards the pretty brunette girl and man with a cane. The two had risen from their bow and curtsy, but their eyes were still low to the ground, although he caught sight of the girl darting glances up, but not at him. He turned slightly and caught his brother's blush. This is Lord Willers Tyrell, the son and heir of Mace Tyrell, the Lord of Highgarden and High Marshal of the Reach, and his sister and Rob's betrothed, Lady Margaery Tyrell, Sansa said, her voice slightly louder than necessary. He was unable to keep the look of surprise off his face when Sansa finished speaking. He wished Robb had told him, so he had time to prepare himself, but realized within seconds of the thought crossing his mind that there had been no time. They had told him the essentials. That was enough. Your Grace, Lord Willers and Lady Margaery said in unison. Lord Willers made to bow again, and Lady Margaery dropped into another curtsy. Please, call me Jon, he said. I am no king, yet. And we are to be family. I will not have my family prostrate themselves before me. Willers Tyrell's eyes rose to meet his and he was unsurprised to see a small flash of surprise in them before they softened slightly. It is good to meet you, Jon. Your brothers and sister speak mostly highly of you. ****. He spoke to Sansa first. They walked through the Godswood together, not speaking, but enjoying each other's company for an age before she finally spoke. Next to Sangza, Nymeria padded along silently, her gaze fixed on Sangza as though she was the most important person in the Westeros. It was strange that Sangza had always been the sibling he was least close with, and yet she was gripping his arm like she never wished to let go again. She had barely stopped looking at him either. At first, he had thought it was because she was trying to place his parentage, and then because she was only apologetic because of his parentage. Then he realized it was neither of those things. She had grown up. He waited patiently for her to speak, content to enjoy her company. "Lady is dead," she spoke eventually, her voice cracking at the end. He froze. Next to him Sangza had kept walking but stopped when she realized he had stopped. "Dead?" He parried at her. "There was an incident on the road to King's Landing," Sangza whispered, dragging him into walking again. "It was my fault. I lied. I got Lady and Micah, the butcher's boy, killed. Joffrey and Cersei had them killed. They are dead because of me." "Oh Sangza," he murmured. Her hand clenched on his arm, but he did not reply. "It is not your fault." "It is," she said quietly. "If I had told the truth, they would still be dead," he finished. "I have heard enough about Cersei to know what she would have done. It is not your fault." She straightened her back and glanced at him with a soft smile on her face. "That is kind of you to say. But it is my fault. I was foolish. Stupid." "Was Nymeria there?" "You went south with both of them, did you not?" "Yes," she murmured. "Arya sent Nymeria away. It was Nymeria who bit Joffrey, but Lady was punished for it. We found each other when we returned home. She was by the woods, and when I made to canter to Winterfell she came out to me. Arya is at the wall, by the way. I know you want to know but are too polite to ask. She should be back within the next 2 weeks. Father made her leave before us." "Nymeria came to you," he said gently. He shifted slightly so that he could wiggle free of her hand on his arm and instead pulled her close so that his arm was wrapped around her waist and her head could rest on his shoulders. "Nymeria was in the north, Sangza. She could have gone to the wall to Arya. But she came to you. I was closer." "Oh, come now, Sangza. You are not stupid," he replied, as he stopped walking and turned to look at her. "You know as well as I do that if Nymeria wanted to go to Arya she would. She came to you." Sangza sniffed slightly and looked up at him, eyes wide and brimming with tears. "You think so?" "Of course," he said gently. "She knew you needed her. So, she came to you." Sangza sniffled again and glanced down to where Nymeria stood, gazing up at her with intelligent eyes. "I was awful to Arya. I got Lady killed. I do not know how Nymeria can even look at me. She must know what I did. They are so smart, Jon." "Because she is smart, Sangza. She knows you made a mistake," he said, keeping his voice soft. "Come, let us walk and you can tell me all about how Robb has managed to snag himself Margaery Tyrell." She laughed. "According to Lady Margaery, their grandmother sent them here to try and find out why father left King's Landing so suddenly. The South is most perturbed by the events. And they came here for a match?" he asked, trying to work out how the match had come about. "I was under the impression that Tyrells were grasping." Sangza glanced up at him. "How did you know that?" "I don't remember you taking such an interest in politics before, brother." "Uncle Aemon, he is at the wall, serving as their maester." "At the wall?" she said, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Aegon v brother. Surely not." Little sister," he said, smiling at her. 100 name days." She tutted slightly under her breath. 100 name days. All that history. Wasted at the wall. Do you think he might be too old to serve, brother? He could come here, and we could arrange for a new maester to go north. He paused. I never asked. He considers himself to be dutiful though, sister. I am not sure he would wish for special treatment. She tutted again, but when she opened her mouth, she continued to discuss Margaery Tyrell. Anyway, they came north to ferret out what father had done. By then, you had arrived in Greywater Watch, according to Lord Reed, who arrived here around the same time the Tyrells did. And Howland told father, you and Robb about Winter. She inclined her head. Father told us about mother too, about what she had done. It was so clear it was to be war, and with the heir to the Reach and his unwed sister here, it was too good an opportunity to pass up. Father blackmailed them. She flushed and turned her head away. You blackmailed them. It was hardly blackmail, she muttered. I simply suggested that we inform them of what had happened and of your claim and tell them they could either flee to the south and when you took the throne that their decision would be remembered, or they could wed Margaery to Robb and back your claim. Even though she could not see it, he smiled at her. They continued walking with Nymeria bouncing around them. Is Robb happy? He asked eventually as they drew closer to the weirwood tree. Margaery says he is, Sansa replied, laughter in her eyes. And if Margaery says it, it must be right. At his puzzled look she continued, just wait. Give Robb time. You will hear all about what Margaery says. He didn't ask what she meant but instead helped her settle down on the floor by the weirwood tree. Once she was settled and Nymeria had thrown herself down across Sansa's lap, he dropped gracelessly down next to her. I take it Ghost is on the way? Sansa asked, her eyes fixed on Nymeria. Aye, he replied. Do they get on? Him and your dragon? He nodded and when she glanced up at him, he said, like family. They bicker, he got used to protecting her when she was smaller and now she is bigger she doesn't need his protection and instead thinks he needs her protection, but they get on well. She misses him. How can you tell? He flushed and turned his head away. I can feel her. Her emotions. He nodded. That is incredibly, Jon, Sansa breathed. You can feel what she feels, even now. He paused and then turned back to her, expecting to see jealousy or scorn in her eyes and instead seeing amazement and joy, and said, I. She feels satisfied. She caught herself something tasty. Sansa laughed. I suppose we should be thankful you will be taking her south, otherwise we would have no food to hunt to fill up our stores ahead of winter. Will you stay here? She nodded. Bran will be the Stark in Winterfell, she said quietly. But without Mother, he will need guidance. My place is not on the battlefield or with an army, so I will stay here and guide Bran and take care of Rickon and keep Arya from getting into mischief. I think you will manage the first two well enough, he replied. But stopping Arya getting into mischief seems like a fool's errand. She smiled at him, her hand running down Nymeria's back. I think I understand Arya a bit more now, she said quietly. The time apart, it has made me grow up. I would never try and stop her from being herself, but I will stop her from doing anything that would get herself or others hurt. You've grown up, he said eventually. I couldn't stay a little girl forever. I wish you could, he replied. But, seeing as you wish to be an adult, tell me, what is this Gendry like? ***. His reunion with Theon, who had apparently been hunting in the Wolf's Wood with Gendry, Robert's bastard, was the most anticlimactic of all the reunions. Theon did not bow. He did not hug him. Instead, the Greyjoy man had looked at Jon and said, I'm not bowing for you. There was a splutter of indignation from Gendry at that, but Jon had paid it no mind. I would not expect you to, he had replied. It's good to see you, Snow, Theon had said. There had been a brief pause and then they crossed the distance between them and clapped each other on the back. Gendry, meanwhile, had stood there looking confused and then bowed and stuttered out a greeting before muttering something about the forge and vanishing. Looking at the man across the table from him, Jon doubted that he and Theon would ever be friends. There was too much water under the bridge. But they did not need to be friends to work well together, and they did not need to be friends to fight together. Once war breaks out and the Ironborn realize you have left Winterfell and the north, they will attack, Theon said, his hand skimming across the map from the Iron Islands to the north. You will need to leave enough soldiers to defend the castles. Father nodded once. Or we ask everyone to relocate inland and accept that castles might be lost for the duration of the war. Ironborn won't raid too far from the coast. We cannot ask people to lose their homes, Robb said. Winter is coming, Father. We don't have time to rebuild any destroyed keeps and we need the older men and boys we leave behind to help the women farm the land near those keeps. We can't spare the men either, Robb Jon said quietly. We have, mayhaps, 12,000 men. We can't afford to ask the Northern Lords to keep men back. Yes, we can, Robb said, leaning over the table and moving the ornate pieces that represented the Reach forces across the map. 100,000 men, he continued, placing the ornate rose pieces in the Riverlands. Margaery said her father always keeps 10 to 20,000 men back to defend Highgarden and the Reach, but, if we ask, her grandmother will send them another 10,000. That would give us 90,000 on the Riverlands borders. So many. Father breathed, his eyes moving swiftly across the board. She told you this? Freely? He asked, unable to keep the skepticism out of his voice. He glanced towards Lord Willers, who jerked his head once in a nod. My sister was right, Willers Tyrell said quietly. We can spare 90,000. Grandmother's raven was clear, she will instruct Father and Garland to take the men north, to the Riverlands border. And it will look like they are musting against us, and for the Lannisters. Robb finished, his face set. Margaery said your grandmother would look to play the Lannisters. Jon bit his tongue to stop himself from commenting on his brother's new favorite phrase. Opposite him, he saw Theon roll his eyes even as Father's face grew grimmer. 10,000, he said, breaking the awkward silence that had settled over the room. He glanced up again to see Theon smirking at Robb. We leave 2,000 in the north. Father, you said you asked Wyman Mardaeli to send 1,000 men to Moat Cailin. When Father nodded, he pressed on, we leave them there, and ask Howland to defend the neck with his men. The other 1,000 we split between the major keeps. If I may, Willers Tyrell said, his face carefully blank. When Jon turned and gestured at him to continue, he said, I would leave 400 at Moat Cailin. Send the rest of them White Harbour. House Mardaeli has a fleet, does it not? Have them ready to sail down to blockade King's Landing. The Red Wine fleet will join them when the time is right. A blockade? He asked, unable to keep the curiosity out of his voice. Cersei and Tywine will double down when it becomes clear they cannot win, Willers Tyrell replied, leaning forwards to move more pieces across the board. The only way we will get into King's Landing without thousands of innocents being killed in the process is if we starve them out. Isn't that what your father did to Stannis Baratheon? Theon snapped. The coward's way. No Northman would hurt an innocent in taking a city. We're not Lannisters. You cannot say that for sure, Willers Tyrell returned. War is not a game. Men change. There are 1 million people in King's Landing. Over half are women. How many do you think are children? I know in the north your women bear arms, but they do not in the south. They could not defend themselves if they were attacked. The last thing His Grace wants is to find himself ruling Westeros with his main supporters being those who raped and pillaged their way through King's Landing. Jon cut across Theon before the man could argue any more with Willers Tyrell. Lord Willers is right. We cannot be sure what will happen after the men get a taste of war, he said quietly. What happened to my brother and sister must not be allowed to happen again. If we must blockade the city to avoid unnecessary deaths, then we will. Theon huffed but did not reply. A blockade, Father said quietly, his eyes moving across the board. How many ships in the Red Wine fleet? That grandmother would send. Mayhaps 200, but she will be mindful of a potential Ironborn attack and wish to keep some back. Next to Jon, Robb let out a low whistle. Would you suggest we send them all, Lord Willers? He asked, even as he moved pieces onto the map to represent the ships of the Red Wine fleet. 150. Keep some back for the Iron Islands. Grandmother will approve, Willers Tyrell replied. It will mean we send less men to the Riverlands though, will that impact the numbers you leave here? He shook his head. No. We'll leave 1,000 Mardaeli men, to garrison the moat and to man their ships. Then another 1,000 split amongst the castles to keep them safe. Which houses will you ask? Robb asked, as all eyes swung to Jon. House Umber, he said eventually. When I was at the wall, Benjen mentioned that rangers had gone missing, and the wildlings were acting oddly. I would ask Great Jon Umber to keep back 1,000 men, led by Smalljon, and split them between Winterfell and Last Hearth. That way they can help the Night's Watch and keep their land secure from wildlings, but also help Winterfell. We can get troops to the other keeps faster than any other house. Father nodded, his eyes rising from the table. A good plan, son. House Umber can be relied upon, and the Great Jon will enjoy the fact his son will help to defend the north, and he will be grateful to leave men behind to defend against potential wildlings. Good. That is decided then, he said. Once the bannermen arrive, we will greet them together. All of us. We will tell them what we have decided, and we will ask them to march south. What if they do not march? They will, father said quietly. If I ask them to, they will. They will not be happy that they were lied to. They might even draw steel. But they will march for me. John watched Willers Tyrrell closely as his father spoke. The man looked surprised, his eyes widening when father finished speaking until he carefully made his face blank again. Clearly, Lord Mace did not have the same levels of support from the Lords of the Reach. I think, unless there are any reasons to delay, Lady Margaery and Robb should wed this night, he said quietly. When Willers Tyrrell's eyes flicked up to him, he said, we march to war. You have pledged your forces, Lord Willers. They were to marry before we march, and I would have them wed. You wish for Robb to get an heir on my sister, Willers Tyrrell said, his face blank but voice frigid. He replied. Robb is my father's heir. Father and Robb both march to war. Being honest, Lord Willers, I would much prefer my brother and Lady Margaery wait to have children. My own mother was not much older than your sister when she had me. But if Robb should fall on the battlefield, then father's heir is Bran. And your brother likely cannot have his own children, Willers Tyrrell finished quietly, his eyes flashing in sympathy. It would cause succession issues. I understand. He inclined his head. Opposite him, Robb scowled. Margaery will do her duty, Willers Tyrrell continued. She will wish to be married in front of the seven, but I understand if you wish for the first ceremony to take place in front of the old gods. My thanks, he replied. Write to your grandmother in the morning. Tell her what we have decided. He sighed and ran his hand down his face, feeling immeasurably tired. I think that is everything, my lords. Father, I wonder if I might speak with you for a moment. ****. Once everyone had filed out of the room and only father and John remained, John threw himself down on one of the chairs in front of the fireplace. Father followed and, when he drew level with John, pressed a mug of ale into his hands and then quietly took his own seat. You did well today, father said after a few moments had passed. He glanced up from his mug of ale and smiled at his father. I had good teachers, he said quietly. At his father's confused look he said, I had you and Maester Stillowin and I had Benjen and Uncle Eamon. What is he like? Old, he replied, a wry smile on his face. But gods, father, he is the smartest man I have ever met. He has this way of cutting straight to the issue. Knowing exactly what to say and when to say it, and his experience. Gods. He knows every house in Westeros. He told me that Lady Olenna controlled the Reach. He's been at the wall for nearly 80 years, before Lady Olenna was even born, and yet he knew about the politics of the Reach. I am glad you found him. That you had a chance to know him, father replied, his voice quiet. He's a good man, he said softly. When the armies march south, I will fly Winter to the wall to tell him all that has happened. He deserves to know. I should be back before you reach the neck. They settled into silence for a while, both nursing their mugs of ale and looking at the empty fireplace. Eventually, father sighed, catching John's attention, and their eyes met. Do you know what House Valerian planned to do with your aunt and uncle? He shook his head. No. But if I had to guess, they will take them to the Driftmark. Keep them safe. And when this war is won. He glanced away, his eyes moving instinctively to the window, wondering when he'd be able to see Winter on the horizon returning from her hunt. I would give Dragonstone to Viserys, if he wishes it, he said softly. House Targaryen has always held Dragonstone. I would have it for myself, but I cannot be in two places at once. And Stannis. Storm's End. Renly. I hadn't got that far, he admitted. We can think on it as we march south, father said gently. What of Daenerys? I don't know, he murmured. If she is pregnant, what do I do with the child once it is born, which it could be already, and if it lives? No one in Westeros will accept a Dothraki marriage. And that makes the child a Dothraki bastard in their eyes. A royal bastard. The child would be treated with scorn its entire life. Gods, father. Everything I have heard about the Dothraki, I hope that none of it is true. But if it is, I do not know what I shall do. What if she wishes to stay with them? I would say yes, of course. But I want her here. She is family. I want to get to know her, as I do with Viserys. But then, what if she wishes to be free of them and live here? I will not cast them out, although I know some will wish it. No, I will let her decide what she wishes to do, and I will support her decisions, whatever they might be. A marriage might be a good idea, if she wishes to stay in Westeros, father responded, his voice cautious as though expecting Jon to snap. A good man that you trust, who will look after the babe and raise it as his own. I'm not selling her off like chattel, father, simply because she was wed in a custom that Westerosi do not agree with, he snapped, unable to keep himself calm. She's not some secret to be hidden away. To be lied about. She is family. I know, father replied, flinching slightly. Then he sighed and said, you are angry at me. For lying to you. For what I did. He did not speak for a few moments. He wanted to yell and tell father that he hated him. He wanted to storm out the room and not look back. He wanted to cry and let tears pour down his face and have his father hug him like he had when Jon was just a little boy. Most of all, he wanted to deny it all and pretend it was okay rather than admit he was upset. I am angry you lied. You had so many opportunities to tell me. Would you have ever told me? I don't think you would, he said quietly. No, I would not. I would have lied to you your entire life to keep you safe. I said earlier that I made many mistakes and errors, but I do not count my decision to keep your mother from you as one of them. It kept you safe. I thought so. I wanted to hate you so much. I thought I hated you. I told Uncle Aemon I hated you, he whispered eventually, his voice cracking and his eyes blurring. He blinked, trying to stop the tears before they leaked from his eyes. Do you know what he said? He said that better men than him or I have made graver mistakes than you made. And he is right. But you lied to me my entire life. My life would have been so different if I had known. You let me think I was your son. I did it to keep you safe, father said, his own voice cracking. You are my son, Jon. I would die 1,000 times for you. I cannot say sorry for not telling you, I had to keep you safe. And, if I had to do it again knowing what I know today, I would. It kept you safe. It kept you alive. Mayhaps if I knew things would turn out differently, I would have changed my decisions all those years ago. But all I know today is that what I did kept you safe. It kept you alive. I will take any hate and scorn you wish to give me, and I will do so with pride, because it means that my son is alive to hate me and that makes everything worth it. I don't hate you, father, he murmured. How could I? Interlude, 298 AC, Aemon Targaryen. Who were House Targaryen most loyal supporters, uncle? Jon asked, not even raising his eyes from the fire as he spoken. The dragon was, once again, snoozing on the logs in the fireplace. The flames flickered around her, creeping up and over her back and, on occasion, into her nostrils. When that happened, she would snort and move her head, but continue snoozing. Next to the fireplace, Ghost slept as well, although his sleep was far more excitable with the direwolf letting out grumbles and yips every now and then as he dreamt. Next to Ghost, so close they were touching, Jon lay on his stomach with her arms propping up his head as he gazed at his dragon. Aemon shifted slightly under his covers and drew his blankets up more tightly against him, repressing a shiver as the cold air washed over him when his hands emerged from underneath his bedding. House Valyrian and the Lords of the Narrow Sea, of course, he began softly. He cleared his throat and then continued, they will support you. Particularly once they see her. Their only concern will be your birth. But the fact you have your dragon should ease most of their concerns. Most. You will be tested by them, nephew, he replied. They will want to be sure you are worthy of their support, that you are not your father nor your grandfather. Jon nodded, even as he continued staring at the fireplace. I see. And the other houses? You should expect support from the Reach and House Tyrell, in particular. It was House Targaryen that made House Tyrell all that they are today. They own House Targaryen much. Father said that Mace Tyrell feasted outside Storm's End and laid siege to it rather than taking the keep. That he stayed away from the battlefield. The man is a coward and a fool, he said, unable to keep the bite out of his voice. How much would have changed if he had acted instead of sat there feasting day and night, we cannot know. But their inaction caused serious harm to our house. How has he managed to stay in power? John asked, finally turning around and pulling himself up so he sat on his bum, legs crossed and gazing at his uncle. Eamon met his eyes and smiled. Lady Olenna Tyrell. His mother. His mother. He laughed, seeing the confusion and bewilderment in his nephew's eyes. Do not be fooled, nephew. Olenna Tyrell is sharp. She is ferocious. She is intelligent. She is grasping, he said, his voice bitter. She wished for a match between her grandson, Lord Willers, your sister Rhaenys. Her greatest wish is for House Tyrell to grow strong. Did Rhaegar agree to the match? He was considering it, I believe, he replied quietly. So, I should expect House Tyrell to support me, but want something in return. He inclined his head. Yes. Likely a match, if they can. I cannot wed every woman who is offered to me to secure support, John muttered. No, you cannot, he said. But no house, no kingdom, would bring you as much as House Tyrell and the Reach will. When I was a boy, their army numbered 70,000, nephew. It can only have grown since then as the population has. They have the biggest grain reserves and some of the best military minds in Westeros. You need the Reach. I wonder if Lady Olenna has a granddaughter, John murmured, his eyes moving around the room but clearly not seeing anything. A Lady Margaery, I believe. She is around your age. How do you know all this, uncle? Because every man who joins the Night's Watch comes to me eventually, for one ailment or another, and when they do, I ask them questions. I get to know them. I find out what is happening in Westeros. And, nephew, I remember every word they say. Because you never know when you might need that information. Quite, he replied bitterly. And I am, after all, only a frail old man. There is no harm in telling me, for instance, that Renly Baratheon is rumored to prefer the company of men over women, or that Jon Arryn's only living child is weaker and frailer than a newborn babe. Chapter 17, Royalty. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary, Arya returns to Winterfell and talks to Sansa and Jon. Ned talks to Gendry about his future and a wedding is held. Wyman Mandaeally meets Winter. In our interlude, Aemon tries to manage Jon's expectations about Viserys and Daenerys. 298 AC, Arya Stark. She and Jory had ridden hard after they left the wall. He was keen to get back to his family and she was keen to find out what had happened to Jon. Their journey had been quick, but not as quick as it had been the last week or so when they had heard that father had summoned his banners. Rumors met their ears in every keep and town they stopped at. When they rode south past Last Hearth, Lord Umber was mustering his men and had barely spared a passing snort her way when Jory had explained that they were coming from the wall. She was pleased she was ignored. She always was, but this time it was different. Important. Whatever her father had written to Uncle Benjen about, the reason they had gone to the wall, was clearly related to why father was calling his banners and, knowing what she did about Jon, she did not want to accidentally let something slip. They had left Last Hearth with fresh horses and a promise from Lord Umber that he would not be the last to arrive at Winterfell. He planned to leave less than a day after them, but his men would be moving more slowly. At night, Jory still sparred with her. It was different this time though, less focus on teaching her how to move as he claimed she knew that now. Instead, he treated her like he would have Jon or Robb when they were her age, not with all his might, but close enough that she nearly always lost. Nearly always. She was fast. On occasion she managed to slip through. She did not ask him what had made him decide to train her like this instead of more slowly, for it was obvious. He was worried. And so, she fought back with all she had, and when they stopped for the night, she peppered him with questions about moves he had used and how and if they might work for her. They did not speak of what was happening in the south or in Winterfell, save once. She asked him whether he would ride south with her father. He had given her a wry smile and said, "If my lord commands me, I will go south." And she had replied, "I would rather you stay in Winterfell." She turned her attention back to the present as the towers of Winterfell broke on the horizon. Home. Jory. He glanced at her then turned his attention back to the castle. Lady Arya. She scowled at him. Will you still teach me how to fight when we get back to Winterfell? He heaved out a put-upon sigh and looked at her again. I suppose if I say no you will just bother me until I say yes, will you not? She grinned at him and nodded. Then I suppose I will be telling Lord Stark that you have potential, and it is better that I train you than you manage to accidentally poke your own eye out flailing around like a newborn babe. She snorted. He was not fooling anyone. He had said, more than once, that she was a natural with a sword. A loud howl broke through the silence around them. She felt a grin spread across her face. Nymeria. Next to her, Jory swore softly. But she barely heard him as she has already kicked her horse sharply in the side and sent it flying into a gallop down the road. It took what felt like an age for her to be able to spot Nymeria. And when she did so she was surprised to see a figure, red hair flying behind her, riding along next to the direwolf. Both moved at breakneck speed towards Arya and Jory. When they drew closer, she pulled her horse up to a trot and then, finally to a slow walk before she dismounted and flung the reins towards Jory who scowled at her. Then she turned on the spot and closed the remaining distance to Nymeria on foot, her sword bouncing against her side as she ran. Nymeria. She called again, her voice breaking. It took less than a second for Nymeria to barrel into her. She laughed in elation as her direwolf pushed her over and smothered her in warm, stinky, kisses with her tongue. Ow! Nymeria! Ow! She yelled. That's my face. There was a laugh from above her and she glanced up, between Nymeria's front paws that were resting either side of her head to see Sansa smiling down at her. There was a beat of silence whilst they met each other's eyes and then Sansa turned away. Jory, if you could please take the horses back to Winterfell. Arya and I will follow on foot. Lady Sansa, I do not think that is a good idea, Jory replied, his tone politer than it was with Arya but brokering a no-nonsense tone. It is not safe. Arya gave Nymeria one last push to get her direwolf off her so that she might sit up. Once she had done so, she clambered to her feet and stood between Sansa and Jory as they stared at each other. Next to her, Nymeria panted heavily. Look up, Sansa simply said, her eyes still fixed on Jory. Arya looked up first, then she looked back down to meet Sansa's eyes. Fucking shit! Jory yelled. Please put your sword away, Jory, Sansa said politely. It won't do much good with winter anyway. I don't think steel can compare to dragon fire. Winter? She asked, unable to help herself. Sansa met her eyes with a grin. What else was our brother going to name his dragon? Asterisk asterisk. It had taken nearly another hour of persuading Jory that, no, the dragon was not going to eat them, that they were perfectly safe around Winterfell with winter around, that they had Nymeria so even if winter did vanish, they were still safe and that, finally, they were not going to kill each other. Then, after that, they did not speak for at least another half hour. I missed you, Sansa said eventually, breaking the silence that had settled between them as they made their way up the King's Road towards home. When Arya made to open her mouth to reply, Sansa glanced down at her and interrupted her, please, let me speak. After that, you can yell and scream and tell me you hate me and that you never want to speak to me again. You're stupid, she said, cutting across whatever Sansa had been about to say. You're my sister, Sansa. Even when I hate you, I love you. Sansa laughed, throwing her hair back and looking at the sky. That is what father said you would say. She paused for a moment, glancing back down at Arya. I am sorry though. For everything. So am I, she whispered quietly. I knew what Joffrey was like already, but I still did what I did. I should have known better. I should have been honest. I shouldn't have lied. She reached out to grab Sansa's hand in hers and although Sansa tried to tug it free after a few moments, Arya clung to it tightly. You were to marry him, Sansa, I cannot say I understand, but you have always been mindful of your duty and your duty was to the prince. Sansa glanced down at her. My duty is to my family, Arya. Family. Duty. Honor. When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives, she replied. Sansa smiled sadly at her. I am sorry. She had to let go of Sansa's hand then as Nymeria forced her way between them. She watched as Nymeria jabbed her head into Sangza's side and Sangza instinctively ran her hand down the direwolf's face and Nymeria leaned into the affection. There was a brief pang of jealousy, but she hastily tried to shoot it down. How did you find Nymeria? Sangza glanced away from Nymeria and smiled at her. She found me. After father and I arrived in White Harbor we came up the King's Road to Winterfell and Nymeria came out of the trees. Arya watched Sangza's face closely as their eyes met. Her sister flinched slightly, but tried to hide it, and withdrew her hand from Nymeria who whined pitifully. You best not have put bows in her fur, she said eventually, grabbing Sangza's hand over the top of Nymeria and placing it back on her direwolf. Nymeria is a queen, not a lady. Sangza laughed brightly. Nymeria is a menace. But I am glad to have had her company. She smiled back but was unable to make it reach her eyes. There is something I must tell you, she said quietly. It is your turn now to promise you will not hate me. Sangza glanced at her curiously but nodded. I promise. I dreamt of you. Sangza raised an eyebrow. I hope you plan on going into a bit more detail. I dreamt of you, but it was not a dream. I saw you through Nymeria's eyes. I watched as you cuddled me at night as you fell asleep and you told me, Nymeria, how sorry you were about what had happened to Lady and how you treated me, Arya, she whispered. I did not mean to intrude on you. It just happened. Sangza's eyebrows rose the longer Arya spoke for. Arya watched as her sister chewed on her lip for a moment. Then, Sangza gave her a gentle smile. Warjing. She nodded. That is what Eamon said. Of course, Sangza breathed out, her eyes widening. You've met Eamon. What he was like? Jon has not said much. Old, she replied, tripping slightly on an uneven stone. When she had righted herself, she glanced up at Sangza again. No. He is old. But he is kind. Intelligent. Fiery. You admire him. She jerked her head in a nod. He told me about Jon, you know. Sangza tripped this time, tumbling forwards onto her hands and knees. She quickly pulled herself back to her feet and then glanced down at Arya even as she continued walking and said, Jon is not going to be happy. He wanted to tell you himself. I do not think he wanted to tell me, she said quietly. You were listening in when you shouldn't have been, Sangza said, realization creeping into her voice. I will not tell you off, for I am sure that Uncle Benjen, Jory and Eamon would have told you off already. I wouldn't listen even if you did, she returned gleefully. Sangza laughed. When have you ever listened to me? ***. Jon was in the courtyard when they arrived, training sword in hand and facing off against Theon. She longed to run over to him and fling herself at him, but instead she stood next to Sangza and watched as her brother ducked and weaved around Theon. He's improved, she murmured. Alisa Thorne said he trained day and night when he was at the wall. Alistair Thorne. He was a Targaryen loyalist who took the Black. He serves as Master-at-Arms at Castle Black. What's he like? Snooky. Mean, she replied frankly. He's not a very good teacher. He has no patience for it, but he taught me a lot. How can he teach you a lot if he's not very good? She glanced up at Sangza, grinning. Because he was so mean it annoyed me and then I made mistakes. And then he'd yell at me about the mistakes. I'd learn. Seems an odd way to teach someone, Sangza murmured back, eyes sparkling. You will continue your lessons here. If father agreed, she replied, turning her gaze back to Jon and Theon. As she watched, Theon tried to get a swing in at Jon's neck, but Jon ducked a fraction before the blow hit and threw himself at Theon. Both their training swords went clattering into the dust and they struggled for a moment before Jon managed to pin Theon down. She shifted slightly and saw Jon had a small, very real, dagger against Theon. That's cheating, Snow. Theon called out as he pushed Jon off. Jon rose. Then he shoved the dagger away again and stuck his hand out to help Theon up. She watched as Theon glared at her brother before taking his hand and laughing as he was pulled to his feet. Theon's changed, Sangza said quietly. Father spoke to him. I don't know what was said, but he's changed. She pursed her lips, thinking about how cruel Theon used to be. She watched as Jon and Theon spoke in hushed tones and then Jon turned and walked off towards a tall, muscled boy who was leaning against one of the walls with his arms crossed. Who is that? He looks like that king, she whispered, more loudly than she intended to. That, Arya, is Gendry. He is King Robert's bastard and our guest, a soft and familiar voice said from behind her. She spun on the spot, lifting her head up to gaze up at her father. Father! She flung herself into his arms with enough force that he staggered back a few steps. I missed you. His arms wrapped back around her. Then he pulled away and her at arm's length. Jory came to see me. She gazed up at him, feeling betrayed. He said he would teach me to fight. Father sighed and let go of her. Then he ruffled his hair. He'll teach you how to fight. But you are to listen, Arya. No sneaking off and trying to train by yourself. You will do everything he says, without question. She nodded, her hair flying around and hitting her in the face. Promise. He smiled at her. Good. I must speak to Lewin, but I will come and find you later. Then he pulled her close and pressed a kiss to her head. I am glad you are home. She resisted the urge to pull away and instead let father linger. When he pulled away, he looked over her carefully once more and then turned and headed off towards the great hall. She watched him go, her eyes moving over the people gathered there. 2 strangers stood next to Robb Stark, one on either side. Who's that? She asked, gesturing towards the girl who was clinging to Robb's arm and gazing up at him in adoration. Margaery Tyrell, Sansa whispered. Robb will marry her shortly. Marry? She yelped. For the war, Sansa murmured. I'll explain later. But she is kind, and funny. And she does not take herself seriously, and Grey Wind likes her. She snorted. We shall see. Arya. A voice said, cutting across any response Sansa had been about to offer. She glanced back to where Jon had been moments before and realized he had moved. Gendry and Theon were now sparring, but Jon had his back to them and was standing only a meter or so away from her, his brows creased and eyes worried. Jon! She cried, closing the distance between them and launching herself into her brother's arms. His arms tightened around her, gripping even more than father had done, and he pulled her close. She felt wetness in her hair, dripping onto her neck, a few moments later and realized her brother was crying. She hugged him back more closely and burrowed her head into his shoulder. Home. She was home. 298 AC, Eddard Stark. Gendry was, objectively, a good boy, nearly a man, in all honesty, but he was still young. His life on the Street of Steel and King's Landing had made him harder in a way that made him seem older than his years, but his eyes were young, and his nerves often got the better of him. Despite that though, Ned had tried not to spend too much time with the boy, for it was too easy and too painful to look at Gendry and confuse him with Robert. Yet now he had no choice. Sansa had asked something of him and, this time, he had to face his cowardice head-on. Gendry was carefully staring at lands beyond Winterfell. His hands were clasped, and he was twisting his fingers around each other in agitation. As Ned watched, Gendry flinched slightly as Winter flew past the battlements, her wings spraying them with water from the wet air and pushing them both backwards slightly. He recovered quickly though, his eyes following the dragon's movements as she circled around the castle and then looped off towards the Wolf's Wood. Your great-grandmother was a Targaryen, he said, before he realized what he had said. Gendry glanced up at him. Pardon? Your great-grandmother, Rhael Targaryen. She was the youngest child of King Aegon V Targaryen and she married Ormond Baratheon. Gendry did not speak for a moment. You know who my father is? He turned slightly, to look at Gendry head-on. The boy did not move for a moment but eventually turned away from the edge of the battlements and met Ned's gaze. As do you, he replied. I think you have known for a long time. Gendry smiled wryly at him. Since we arrived, I heard the servants talking. King Robert's bastard. He told you to bring me here, I take it. Keep me out of sight. He shook his head. He did not even know that you existed. Then why am I here? Robert had many children. The boy, Joffrey, and his brother and sisters cannot be counted amongst them, he said quietly. I saw you in King's Landing, and I already knew what Joffrey and his siblings were. Robert was many things, he was a bad king and a troubled man, but he was my friend. You are his son. I brought you north to keep you safe. What from? The Queen. Lord Stannis Baratheon also had his suspicions regarding the legitimacy of Cersei's children. I know the Master of Whispers, Lord Varys, did as well. I doubt they were the only ones. I could not be sure, but I did not want to risk leaving you in King's Landing with no protection and no idea of the threat against you when I could bring you north. If too many people became suspicious of the legitimacy of the Queen's children, removing you and your half-siblings was the quickest way to remove part of the proof. Gendry did not speak for a moment. Then he sighed and turned back to look at the lands outside Winterfell. I thought it was too good to be true, he said eventually. Boys like me don't get taken in by lords. I knew something was wrong. But Sansa, she was so nice. So kind. So eager to be my friend. I pushed my worry down. She did it because that is her nature, he replied quickly. Sansa had no part in my decision. She did not even know at that point. When did she find out? On the ship north. Several days into our journey, he said. Then hastily added, she had already sat with you for several meals and made it her business to get to know you before she realized. She did not say. He sighed and leaned against the battlements. Do you wish she had? I thought she was my friend. She is. It is she who urged me to tell you. Gendry turned to look at him. What was he like? My father. I only ever saw him from a distance. A good man, once, he replied eventually. You look like him. Gods, when I first saw you, I thought I was looking at your father 20 years ago. He was funny, loud and sharp. But, as I said, he was troubled. He never recovered from my sister's death. I know the story, Gendry said quietly, turning back to gaze over the battlements. They whisper of it in Flea Bottom. They loved Rhaegar, you know. Not like the Lannisters. He nodded, unable to speak. What will I do now? Gendry asked eventually. Does Jon know? As do Robb and Theon, he said quietly. Your looks, they are too obvious to hide. As to what you wish to do, it is your choice. But I do have something to ask you. I will listen, Gendry said, his voice bordering on suspicious. I will be frank. Sansa wishes for a match with you. Gendry started slightly, turning to look at him. His mouth opened slightly, and he licked his lips, but no words came out. Not right now. Likely not for many years, he said quietly. She was betrothed once, to Joffrey. Did she tell you of it? Gendry jerked his head in a nod. His lips pursing together. She told me of Lady. Of what he was like. Before that, Sansa was different. She was not a true northern girl. She longed to be in the south, yet it changed her. She lost her best friend, and she thought she had lost Arya. She has grown up because of it. She understands the south now, and it is not for her. It holds too many memories. She does not wish to leave the north. Ever. There are few matches I can make for her that would enable her to stay here, and fewer still that I believe would make her happy. You have been a true friend to her, Gendry. I have seen it with my own eyes. And I think, if you will forgive me for speaking so frankly, that she has been one to you. I am a bastard. You are, he said cautiously. But you are still Robert's only son that I know is alive, and it is increasingly unlikely that Stannis will have more children, and Renly certainly will not. I would have you legitimized. I would give you a keep, here, in the north. A small one. One that Sansa could run if you did not wish to. What do you want of me? Nothing. All I want is for you to treat her as you have done already. To take care of her and be kind to her. To make her happy. Gendry turned his attention back to the land beyond Winterfell, his brow furrowed, and his face set in a frown. She will not stop being your friend if you say no, Gendry, he said carefully. She has suffered from a bad match before. All I wish for this time is a match that makes her happy. If you do not wish for her, then she will not be happy in a match. You will not order it. No, I will not force a man nor a woman to wed if there is to be no happiness in their match, he replied. I have asked you, because she wishes for it, and I believe it will make you both happy. As you have probably noticed, Sansa is nothing if not determined. She could likely run a keep single-handedly herself already, and you could spend every day in the forge, if you wished. She is very young, Gendry said eventually. She may change her mind. She is, he agreed. I would expect a lengthy betrothal. An opportunity for you to get to know each other as man and woman, chaperoned, of course, and not just as boy and girl. You speak as though this request is nothing, the boy replied. Can I speak to her about this? I never wanted a castle nor a keep. I just wanted to be a blacksmith. Of course, he agreed. And if you say no, she will still be your friend, Gendry. And you will still have a place here. And if you wish, I will still ask Jon to legitimize you. My thanks, Lord Gendry said, turning back to the land beyond Winterfell and effectively ending their conversation. ****. It was a small ceremony that saw Margaery and Robb wed. Lord Willers had given his sister away with a simple smile and nod and then taken his place near Sansa and Gendry. They did not feast afterwards, and instead they simply retreated to their respective chambers, although, of course, Margaery and Robb went to their new quarters. The wedding had been pushed back until nearly the hour of the wolf. Jon had wished to speak to both Margaery and his brother properly before they had wed, and so none of them had wished to stay awake later than was necessary. Despite all the simplicity, even by northern standards, it was a beautiful wedding. House Stark and Willers Tyrell had stood with a torch each, casting the godswood in a gentle light of a dozen flickering flames, as Margaery and Robb had said the words. And the couple looked happy in a way that few truly did on their wedding day. Ned, certainty, could not remember looking so pleased when he wed Cat. But, even then, Ned could not help but feel his son had been cheated in some way. Robb deserved to have all his future bannermen with them and revel in the joy of his marriage. Yet he understood Jon's desire to move quickly. When he rose the next morning to break his fast, he was unsurprised to see everyone bar Robb and Margaery were already present. He paused as he passed his children, pressing a kiss to each of their heads, nodded in greeting at Lord Willers and then took his own seat and began to pull his food towards him. "What do we call Lady Margaery now?" Arya asked when he had taken his first bite. "If she wishes, we call her sister," Sansa replied, before Ned could. He nodded his head even as Arya's lips twisted in a frown. "Why do Robb and father both need to go south?" "I understand, Jon, but father or Robb should stay here," Bran interjected quietly. "There should always be a Stark in Winterfell, you said so yourself, father." "You will be the Stark in Winterfell, Bran," he replied. "You will have Lord Willers and Sansa to guide you along with Lewyn." "But why do you have to go?" He sighed quietly and swallowed a bite of his porridge. "Because I must lead my bannermen and Robb must go with me because, one day, these will be his bannermen. They will not respect Robb if he has sat out a war safely in the north. Like I am. You are a child. Then I am too young to be the Stark in Winterfell." He could not help but groan at his son's logic. On his other side, Lord Willers laughed quietly. "I was just a few years younger than you when my father rode north in the rebellion," Willers Tyrell said, leaning around Ned to look at Bran several seats down. "Count yourself lucky, Bran, that you have an older sister and I to guide you. I had grandmother." He repressed a snort. "You have acted in your father's stead before," Bran said quietly, his voice barely carrying in the noise of the great hall. "I have," the man replied. "If you wish for my help and guidance, you need only ask. We are family now, after all. And if you do not wish to be the Stark in Winterfell, then your sister will surely act it in your place. But between you and I, being in charge can be quite fun. You can pick what the cooks produce for every meal." He watched as Bran perked up. "I could have strawberry cake every night. And every morning." Bran leaned forward in his chair, eyes brighter than they had been in moons. "Will you show me?" Willers Tyrell laughed. "Of course. Although you may wish to consider something other than strawberry cake every night, Margaery has a simply divine lemon bread recipe that we use in Highgarden. If you have it with porridge in the morning, it is the best thing." "Lemon bread?" Sansa asked brightly. "Yes. We put lemon juice into the dough and then put the rind on top. It makes the bread quite sour, but if you have it with some honey and a bowl of porridge, it is the perfect start on a warm day." He let himself get lost in his thoughts as Sansa and Bran enthusiastically discussed cakes and bread with Willers Tyrell. He found his gaze slipping towards where Gendry sat, near one of the other tables with Theon. Both boys had their heads bent together. As he watched, Gendry shook his head and leaned away from Theon, crossing his arms. The boy's gaze flicked up to Sansa, who was laughing brightly at something Willers Tyrell said, and then as quickly as they had done so, away again. Theon clearly noticed this, as Ned had, for he leaned forwards again and seemed to whisper something that made Gendry relax. Then Gendry nodded once and stood up, crossing over the room until he was stood awkwardly in front of the table. "La Sansa," he started, fumbling slightly and blushing as he did so. "Sansa, I wondered if you wished to go for a walk in the Godswood with me." He busied himself with his food, but listened carefully as Sansa stuttered through her own response. Then she rose and headed around the table to meet Gendry. He lifted his gaze from his food to meet Theon's eyes and jerked his head slightly. Theon nodded and then lazily stretched, stood up and meandered out the hall behind Sansa and Gendry, acting, for all the world, like he usually left a bowl full of porridge when he left the table after breaking his fast. "They'll make a handsome match," Lord Stark Willers Tyrell said once the noise in the hall had started up again. "And a smart one." He glanced up, smiling slightly as he did so. "A happy match is all I wish for her." "It is all anyone wishes for the people they care for," Willers Tyrell replied. When Ned raised an eyebrow, the man said, "My grandmother is more practical than me. She wished for Margaery to be queen. I wished for Margaery to be happy. Margaery wished for Margaery to be happy. Do you think she is?" Willers Tyrell laughed, throwing his head back. "I think that even if Jon had offered a match with her, she would have found a way to get Robb." He felt his eyebrows raise even higher on his forehead. "Margaery is very young, even though she does not act it. She wishes for love and someone to worship her. Who will put her first and cherish her? A man who would be king could never put her first." "You think Robb will?" "I think that your son already cares enough for my sister that even if they are not in love now, then they will be shortly." He sighed. "They really are very young." The other man was spared from answering as Jon entered the hall, walking quickly. He did not head towards his own seat at that table but instead, swung across to stand behind Father Marndale. Banners on the horizon. 298 AC, Jon Snow. "You are early, Lord Wyman," Father said, extending his arm to grasp Lord Wyman's and then pulling the man into a firm hug with a firm slap on the back. "You must have ridden night and day to get here in such good time." Lord Wyman embraced his father back and then pulled away. "White Harbor has been ready to march since you left us but a moon ago, my friend." He watched as Father's face relaxed and a true smile spread across it. "I do you a disservice by forgetting your intellect, my friend. Come, partake of guest right and meet my family." "Guest right is not necessary, Ned. But I would be glad of food and ale regardless," Wyman Marndale replied, his eyes bright and fixed on the food and ale that Sansa had brought forwards. He took a large piece of bread, slathered it in salt and swallowed it in one bite. Then he quaffed his ale just as fast. "Good to see you again, Lady Sansa. I did not think it possible, but you have grown even more beautiful since we last met." He watched as Sansa smiled back at Lord Wyman. "It is good to see you again, Lord Wyman. Let me take care of your men whilst you and my father talk." There was a brief pause as Sansa bustled off towards the Marndale men lined up in the courtyard behind them, Gendry and Theon trotting dutifully after her. "Come, Wyman, meet my family," Father said, turning away and heading back towards where Jon and the rest of the family waited. Jon watched as Father paused in front of Robb, who was stood next to Margaery and Lord Willers. "My son and heir," Robb Father said, pride heavy in his voice. "And his wife, the Lady Margaery Tyrell." There was a pregnant pause. Then Wyman Marndale said, in a voice more polite than Jon had ever heard, "House Tyrell. You have been busy, Ned." Then he greeted Robb politely and placed a delicate kiss on the back of Margaery's hand. "A pleasure to meet you again, Lady Margaery. Winifred will be pleased that you will be remaining here." Margaery grinned widely back at Lord Wyman and said, in a voice that sounded both pleased and embarrassed, "I am pleased too, Lord Wyman. I hope that I shall get to spend more time with Lady Winifred in the coming moons and years." Wyman Marndale jerked his head in a nod and then turned his attention to Willers Tyrell. "Lord Willers, good to see you again. I take it you will be staying here for the foreseeable." "Yes, Lord Wyman," Willers replied. I do not think I would be much use on the battlefield, and House Stark is family now. Quite so, Wyman replied. Then he carried on moving down the line, greeting Bran and Rickon in turn. Then he paused in front of Jon. "My nephew," father said quietly, his voice barely discernible over the din of the courtyard. "Jon." To his credit, Wyman Martindale did not so much as flinch. Instead, his eyes ran carefully over Jon's face, lingering on his nose and jaw, before they fixed on his eyes again. "Oh dear," he said. "You do not seem surprised, my friend." Wyman glanced back at father and then turned his eyes to Jon as he said softly, "If you know what to look for, it is obvious." He sighed and clucked his tongue even as he extended his hand to Jon and said, "Do you have proof?" Jon flashed him a smile as he extended his own hand and said, "I. If you wish to see it now, I would gladly accompany you to the Godswood, Lord Wyman." The man quirked an eyebrow at him but inclined his head. "Let us go now then. We will meet you in my solar," Wyman father said as he began to shepherd Jon's siblings away. Father paused slightly, his eyes flicking from Lord Wyman to Jon and back again. "I'll have some ale ready." Jon watched as Lord Wyman's eyes raised in surprise. "This must be some proof if your father thinks I am going to need more ale this early in the morn." He grinned at the man. "If we had anything stronger, he would offer that," he replied. Then he gestured towards the Godswood and smiled as Lord Wyman fell into pace beside him. "If you will forgive me for saying it, Lord Wyman, you have taken the news that I am not my father's son well," he said politely. "Ned told me 2 moons ago that he thought that Joffrey was a bastard born of incest. He has had me man Moat Cailin with 1,000 men," the man replied carefully. "I knew something more was going on. I did not know for sure, but it seemed likely war against the Lannisters was coming. I have known Ned for years. He would not march lightly, and he would not march without a plan. It is not my place to press Ned, and he always tells us what we need to know, eventually, and I trust him more than any other man in the north. My father is a good man. You still consider him your father?" He jerked his head in a nod. "He is still my father. He raised me. He taught me right from wrong. He clothed me. He gave me a roof. He loved me. What more is there to being a father than that? Nothing." He smiled at the man. "Despite who my mother was, my father will always be Ned Stark. Spoken like a true Stark." He nodded. Then he paused as they drew level with the entrance to the Godswood. "I would ask that you do not draw steel, Lord Wyman. Drawing steel on your liege lord, or his children, is a serious offense," the man replied, glancing down at him. "I would not do so on Ned's son." I know you would not. But it is not me I am worried about," he said, nodding to the guards who had taken up position outside the Godswood. Wyman Martindale glanced at him curiously. Then the man sighed and unbuckled his scabbard and gave it to one of the guards. "Best keep hold of this, lads." Then without looking back he crossed into the Godswood. Jon nodded once to the guards and followed him in. "Where to?" "This way, my lord," Jon replied. They walked in silence for a minute or two until they were close to the back of the Godswood. He could feel Winter's impatience through the bond. When they finally drew close to the weirwood tree, Jon paused. "So, who do you have in here?" the man asked, drawing to a halt next to Jon and peering curiously around. "Do not tell me you have smuggled your aunt or uncle here." He laughed. "Nothing quite so dramatic, Lord Wyman." There was a loud snort from behind them. Next to him, Wyman Martindale froze. Jon turned first, facing Winter. He glanced to the side just as Wyman Martindale turned around, his eyes widening. He watched as Wyman Martindale took a step back and then, a few seconds later, took the same step forwards again. "Well, shit," the man said eventually. "Proof indeed." He did not take his eyes off the man as Wyman Martindale took another step towards Winter. He knew he could trust Winter, but, although he wished to trust Lord Martindale, he could take no risks. The man stopped walking and cocked his head to the side as he met Winter's gaze. Then the man moved slightly to one side. Winter's eyes followed him. The man snorted indelicately. "Stark colors. Fitting. You are taking this very well, Lord Martindale," he remarked quietly. "Oh, I am not. I am shitting myself," the man replied, turning slightly to cast John a long thoughtful look. But you are Ned's son. You would not kill his bannerman. I would not, he said. And nor would she. The man nodded, turning his full attention back to Winter. I was in King's Landing but a few moons before the rebellion, you know. I saw the skulls of the dragons of old, of Balerion and his kin. I've read the books and seen the tapestries of how big they were, how strong, how bright their scales shined. I dreamt of them when I was but a boy, for what boy doesn't dream of being a dragon rider? He said reverently, his eyes fixed on Winter's. Then he glanced back at John and said, to see one in the flesh, it is but a dream. And to know she belongs to a Stark, it fills me with joy. As I belong to her, he replied quietly. We belong to each other. ****. It took some persuading for Lord Wyman to agree to call him John rather than anything else and, in return, John had forcefully been told that he was to call Lord Wyman just Wyman when they were alone, and to speak frankly. John had no time for false platitudes, they did not come easily to him either as a person nor as a Northman. Last I heard you went to the wall, but did not swear your vows. Why did you go north if not to join the Watch? I went to join the Watch, he replied. But when I got there, the Maester, a Targaryen, recognized me. He smiled wryly at Wyman. I think if he had been younger, he would have, literally, beaten some sense into me. As it was, he did not need to. He had his egg, and he gave it to me. And then it hatched. Wyman sucked in a sharp breath. She is but moons old. He nodded. She is growing more quickly. Do you know why? He paused, considering how much he should offer to the other man. She was born at the wall, and has spent much time in Greywater Watch. Magic. I believe so. Dragons are magic, after all. It makes sense. Wyman nodded. She will continue to grow as quickly. I am not sure, he replied, not wanting to say her growth had already noticeably slowed since they had left Greywater Watch. Wyman nodded as though content with John's non-answer and turned his attention from John to Ned. He stared at father for several minutes before he sighed loudly. You know, Ned, the Lords are not going to be happy with this, Wyman said quietly. His eyes flicked from Ned to John then back again. They will stand by you, you know they will. But they will not be happy that they must once again march south. We risk leaving the north vulnerable. Wildling attacks have increased in moons. I had to execute half a dozen myself less than a week after you left White Harbor. We caught them trying to board passage on one of our ships. They never come to White Harbor. They don't come that far south. Not ever. Wyman leaned forward and took a hearty swig of ale. And the stories they all told Ned. They were terrified. Men cannot fake that level of terror. I had half a mind to let them flee. What concern is it of mine if they wish to go to Essos? But the law is the law. Ned glanced at John, who inclined his head. Wyman, John said quietly. We have a plan. If you agree, and I would hear your honest thoughts on it, I would ask that you leave 400 men in Moat Cailin. 600 Mandaeally men to take your fleet south to blockade King's Landing with the Red Wine fleet. Then we will ask Lord Umber to leave Small John and 1,000 Umber men to protect the north from the wildlings. He paused and tossed Theon a cautious look. And the Ironborn. Wyman Mandaeally did not speak for a few minutes. His brows were furrowed as he gazed at the map in the middle of the table. I would need 1,000 men to crew our ships and provide a reasonable defense if they are boarded, he said eventually. I could do it with 600, but the Lannisters have their own fleet, and should we arrive before the Red Wine fleet, I would prefer to not take the chance. John leaned forward over the table, looking at the map and the figures that represented the houses of Westeros and their units. Then he nodded once. That will work. Where will you march? Down to Riverrun, and once we have joined forces with the Riverlands men, we will march to meet the Reach. At least, that is our plan. When do you need me to leave? It will take, perhaps, 3 moons to get to King's Landing, a moon to gather our forces from the moat and get them home, plus time to stock the ships with supplies and then sailing. It is not usually a moon's journey, but the sea is a fickle beast. He glanced at Willers, gesturing for the man to speak. Once the Lords of the North have all agreed to the plan and to march, I will write to Grandmother and have her send the Red Wine fleet to King's Landing. She will not send them until the Reach army has joined with the Northern and Riverlands one, which will likely take 6 moons or so. If she sends the fleet before then and begins a blockade, the Reach will suffer for it. I said Jon. Tywine and any Lannister or Baratheon forces would sweep through the Reach before we could even get past the twins. We'd have lost the war before we begin. Wyman leaned over and looked at the map again. One fat finger moved from Riverrun to the Reach border with the Riverlands. He seemed to murmur quietly to himself. Then he nodded. Send word when you depart Riverrun. I'll have Wendell wait another week and then set sail. That way we should arrive only a few days or so, if the tides are good, before the Reach. At that time of year, we'll have to work harder than the red wine ships to get to King's Landing. Jon opened his mouth to ask how when the distance from the Arbor to King's Landing seemed to be longer than that of White Harbor to King's Landing, but before he could speak, someone spoke over him. Tides, Jon Theon said, his hand skimming over the map. The moon and the time of year affect how the tides move. The seas in the south are usually more gentle, fairer, than those in the north anyway. He grinned up at Theon. I shall take yours and Wyman's word on that. They spoke for several more hours, going over the plan and tweaking small parts of it until they were all content. When they finally stopped speaking, the sun had set on the horizon and he let out a long yawn, unable to help himself. We should head to the Great Hall. Sansa will be wondering where we are, he said, stretching slightly. I came the echoes back. All the men began to file out of the room, talking softly. He let himself hang back with Wyman, keen to speak to the man in privacy. I wondered, Wyman, if you might do a favor for me, he said quietly, once the others were far enough away that they would not overhear. Of course. Take Theon Greyjoy with you, he murmured. Wendell would still have command, but Theon is a Greyjoy. It is in his blood. He has not had the chance to sail since he was a boy, and one day he could rule Pike. He needs to know how to sail, and there is no better man to learn from than Aemon Daly. Wyman did not speak for a few moments. They were nearly at the Great Hall when he finally whispered, eyes fixed on Theon and Robb walking ahead of them, you trust him? He nodded. He's rough around the edges, and arrogant, but I trust him. Then it shall be done. Interlude, 298 AC, Aemon Targaryen. I cannot wait to meet them, Jon said quietly, his voice almost reverent. He sighed and did not speak for a moment, wondering how best to phrase what he needed to. Jon met his eyes across the room from where he was sat, back against the wall, with Ghost's large head on his lap, and gave him a look that indicated he knew exactly what Aemon was thinking. You think it will not go as I hope? Viserys has spent much of his life believing that he is the last Targaryen male with a valid claim to the throne, he began, his voice tinged with nerves. I do not know what he was like as a child, but that sort of pressure on a child, on any child, it is a cruel burden. It is one that changes them. You think he will be troubled? I think that he is a boy who has spent many years being solely responsible for his sister, for himself and for the survival of House Targaryen. He is 22 now, yet he was only 8 when his father, brother and mother died. That takes a toll on anyone, and he was a child of 8 who had to flee his home, everything he had ever known, lest he end up like his niece and nephew. Jon sighed. What do I do if something is wrong? I do not know, he whispered, unable to sound more confident. It will depend on the manner on what is wrong. In a worst-case situation, nephew, you might find your claim challenged or threats against you. The throne, or the idea of it, may well be the only thing that has kept them gone all these years. To know that their claims are gone, it will be hard for them. Gods, Jon replied, eyes widening in horror. I had not even thought. That is because you are young, nephew. You have all the excitement and optimism of youth. Do not let an old man's concerns take that away. What do I do? Jon whispered, his hands tightening around Ghost. You cannot understand a person until you have tried to understand their motivations nor their experiences. You must think about what you would think, and feel were you them, having lived the lives they have, and then you must decide what you would want and what would make it better. I would just be glad to have more family, Jon said quietly. I would be so pleased. He looked at Jon closely and watched as his nephew gazed at the floor, his eyes sad and posture hunched. Then he shifted slightly in the bed and eased himself out, taking care not to dislodge the sleeping dragon, and shuffled over to where his nephew sat. He carefully settled down on the floor and pulled his nephew against him, paying no mind to the fact that Jon towered over him even sitting down. There was a moment where Jon did not move. Then, eventually, Jon leaned against him and let the tears pour down his face. On Jon's lap, Ghost shifted so he was laying completely over his master, covering Jon's legs completely. "I did not mean to upset you, nephew," he whispered, tightening his arm around Jon and trying to pull him even closer. "Truly, I do not wish to cause you agony. I just want you to understand that it might not be the reception you hope for. I pray to the gods that it is, but family is a tricky beast, and people who have suffered as Viserys and Daenerys have, they do not always respond as we would expect nor as we would hope." Chapter 18, Often. Chapter text. Chapter summary. Jon speaks to his father and Margaery enjoys some time with Robb. 2 moons after they last spoke, Daenerys and Viserys talk. In our interlude, Benjen and Aemon talk. Notes: this won't be the end. Viserys struggling to accept his new life. Change doesn't happen overnight, or even over 2 moons. 298 AC, Jon Snow. The Northern Lords were rowdy. Next to him, father was relaxed, happier than he had a right to be. In all honesty, given all that was going on, the Riverlands aflame, his wife vanishing into the Eyrie, and about to march to war, and seemed to be in his element as he watched his bannermen cause chaos in the Great Hall. There was a soft smile on his face, and he was gazing around the room as though trying to take in every second. As though sensing Jon's eyes on him, father turned to glance at him. Jon cast his eyes around the room quickly, realizing that the Northern Lords would likely soon be so drunk that they would forget any speech father planned to make. He turned back to look at father and nodded. His father rose instantly, and, within seconds, silence had descended. It was, Jon could not help but think, not only a reflection of the admiration and support his father's bannermen had for him but also a mark of their respect for father. He had not needed to say a word, he had just risen, and they had fallen silent even when moments before they had been singing bawdy songs and trying to grope the serving girls. "My lords. I have spoken to you all already about what happened 6 and 10 years ago in Dorne and what has happened in King's Landing, so I will not repeat myself. But what I will say is this: it is the honor of a lifetime to be the Warden of the North." House Stark called, and every house in the North answered. House Stark called, and you came. You answered without question, and you have remained. That is true loyalty. I hope that before the wars are done, I can repay that loyalty 1,000-fold. Every single man and woman in this room is someone I will be proud to fight beside in the wars to come. More than that, every man and woman in this room is someone I am proud to call a friend to House Stark. On the morrow we march. We march for justice and for honor. The ravens have flown, my lords. By this week's end, every house, great and minor, will know what House Lannister did. I do not know if others will rise to help us seek the justice that so many deserve, but even if they do not, we will win this war. To the north. To the north. Robb called, rising from his seat with his mug in hand. Jon rose too, and across the room every lord and lady did likewise. To House Stark. After that, the lords became progressively louder and rowdier. Bawdy songs echoed around the room, and Jon watched as his father left the table with Jory and began to mingle with his bannermen. "Did you not wish to give your own speech?" Margaery asked suddenly, turning to look at him. "They are marching south to help crown you." He shook his head. "I have spoken to them all already. I have no more to say." In truth, neither did father, he just knows that it is expected. "You have to get used to giving speeches you don't wish to, Your Grace," Margaery said quietly. "It will be expected." "I know, but I do not wish to make them until I have to." She grinned at him. "Then I should warn you that the Reach armies will expect a rousing speech from you before this war is over. You may wish to get started now. Any advice?" He watched as she rose to her feet and grinned down at him. "Tell them how wonderful they are, how brave they are, and how glad you are to fight by their side. After that you can tell them whatever you wish, and they will not care." She glanced over towards Wyman Martindale and then turned back to Jon. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I must speak to Lord Wyman on a private matter." "Of course," he murmured. She gave him a dazzling smile and turned to her other side to place a chaste kiss on Rob's cheek and left the dais that the high table was on. He watched, a small smile on his face, as Margaery wended her way down between two of the tables and then, finally drawing close to Wyman Mandaealy, leaned down to ask the Lord a question. His eyebrows raised when Wyman Mandaealy nodded enthusiastically and moved over to make room for her. "What is she doing?" Sansa whispered to Robb. "I do not know." There was a brief silence between them as they all watched as Margaery and Wyman leaned their heads together and seemed to fall into a serious discussion. There was a pause at one point as Wyman raised his eyes up to the top table, skimming across it, before turning back to Margaery. Margaery leaned back, a cheeky smile on her face, and then gestured up to the table and then leaned back towards the man. "I best go and see what she is up to. If I am not careful, I will have lost my wife within a moon of marriage." Sansa muttered something that had Robb flushing bright red and nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste to get away. He laughed and rose to his own feet, holding out a hand to Sansa. "Come, sister, let us speak to our father's bannerman." She let him pull up her to her feet and escort her to the first table. Within seconds she was mobbed by the Mormont women who had already managed to ensnare Arya. He lingered for a few moments and then, very quickly, realized he did not want to hear the advice the women were giving Sansa. He hastily made his apologies and backed away. "A wise man you are, your grace," Gratian Umber boomed behind him. "Fuck off." One of the Mormont women yelled without even breaking away from their conversation to yell the words. Gratian barked out a laugh but paid the women no mind as he threw an arm around Jon and steered him away. "Karstark is going to corner you tonight about his Alis. I thought you may appreciate the warning. And you were not planning to corner me about your own daughters, my lord." To his credit, Gratian did not so much as flinch as he said, "No. You're too pretty for my daughters. They're the jealous type. Best they do not have a husband who is prettier than them." He barked out a laugh. "So, what did you want, my lord?" Gratian carefully guided him to a corner of the great hall and leaned against the wall. He gestured for Jon to do likewise. He raised an eyebrow but leaned against the wall and stared out at the hall filled with northern lords laughing and joking with each other. "You are sending my son back to Last Hearth." "I am. With 1,000 men," he replied. "And we have had this discussion, Gratian. Several times. He is angry. I do not care what he thinks," he said quietly, his voice barely discernible over the many voices in the hall. "I care what you think. You have made an enemy out of my son, Jon Snow. But you have made an ally of his father, and that is more important. You will have years to earn my son's respect and trust, but only weeks to earn mine before I fight by your side." He turned his head to look at Gratian's side profile. "How angry is your son?" "Angry. Furious. He thinks it is a slight on his skills. Only women and the weak stay behind when we march to war." He glanced away, looking over the men and women in the hall. "Your son is a fool. If anything, it is a testament to his skills that it is him I want in the north, guarding it from all who would see it burn in our absence." Gratian snorted. "I. But try telling him that. Have you thought any more on my proposition?" he asked a few moments later. "I have." He grimaced. "Do you plan on making me do all the speaking in our conversations, my lord?" Gratian took another hefty swig of his ale and belched loudly. "Northmen belong in the north, your grace." He replied. "Which is why I asked you." Gratian sighed, his eyes darkening slightly as he turned to look at Jon. "Just to the wall." I would not ask your uncle to go further than that." "You ask much of House Umber, your grace." He pushed away from the wall and turned to face Gratian. "I ask it of House Umber because you know the wildlings better than any of us could ever hope to, and you have lost more than any other house because of it," he said quietly. "You will not force us." He shook his head. Gratian scowled at him for a moment. Then he sighed again. "When Smalljon returns north, I will ask him to relay the message to my uncle. It will be his choice, your grace." "As it should be," he replied. "And if he says no, I will not think less of him for it, and nor will anyone else. No one will ever know of this request but your family and me. You have my word." "As a Targaryen or a Stark?" "As a Stark."
****. Later that night, when the revelry in the great hall grew a bit too boisterous, and his father had long since vanished, as had Margaery and Robb, he took himself off to the crypts for the first time since he had returned to Winterfell nearly a moon before. As always, torches flickered inside in their brackets and the gentle light helped him navigate his way down the stairs until he was at the end. He paused there for a moment, his eyes fixed on the darkness that awaited him. Then he sighed, grabbed a torch from one of the brackets and strode into the crypts. It did not take him long to find himself in front of his mother's statue. He had been down before, but he had never truly looked at her statue, for back then she just had been his dead aunt who a rebellion had been fought over. He placed the torch in one of the nearby brackets and took a step closer to the statue. "Everyone always said she was full of life," he said quietly. "This statue, it does not look like what I had expected. How long have you known I was here?" He glanced towards where his father stood, almost completely hidden in the shadows. "Since I arrived." "You left footsteps in the dust. Your absence in the hall was noticeable." Father nodded. Then a second later he strode forward and took his place next to Jon to stare at Lyanna Stark's statue. To capture the joy and happiness of your mother in a statue would have been impossible, even for a master craftsman. "Why were you skulking in the dark, Father?" "I was waiting for you. You could not have known I would come here." "We have not spoken of your mother." "The chances of you coming here before we rode south were good," Father replied. "I told you once I would tell you of her." "What do you wish to know?" "Uncle Benjen told me enough," he replied. "I do not need to know anymore. There is so much I could tell you. Stories of when we were children. Mayhaps one day, Father, but not now." "Why not?" He sighed and turned to face his father. The flickering light from the torches made his father look far older than his years. "She is dead. I have spent years wondering where my mother is, if she was alive, if she missed me, if she ever thought about me, and now I know she was here the whole time. I am sorry. We have spoken on this, Father, I understand." "I do," he murmured. "But I do not wish to think of her. Not of what could have been. I need to think on what is. I cannot afford to think about the past when I ride to war. I need to be focused, not grieving for a life I didn't have." "Can I speak to you of one thing?" Father said softly, his voice pleading. "Just one thing." It was on the tip of his tongue to say no. But, seeing the desperation in his father's eyes, he found himself jerking his head in a nod. "She loved you," Jon, Father whispered. "She loved you so much. All the things she could have said when I found her, all the words we could have shared, and all she wanted to do was tell me your name and make me promise to love you as my own. Promise to take care of you. Promise to protect you. She loved you. You had not even been in the world for 5 minutes and yet you were the most important thing, for both of us." He nodded, but otherwise did not speak. "You have not even asked if she named you," Father whispered suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you not wish to know?" He was about to shake his head, then he paused. His eyes flicked over his mother's statue. As he watched a drop of water from the crypt ceiling dripped onto her face, landing just below her eye. From there it slid down her face, making it look as though she was crying. Then dropped off the stone edge of her chin and down onto the floor. "No," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper as he turned away from the statue. "It makes no difference. Not in the end." He glanced at his father as he made to walk past him. Father was not looking at him but instead had his eyes fixed on Lyanna's statue. "You named me Jon and that name kept me safe. It is the name I have grown up with. It is the name my brothers and sisters call me. I am more a Snow than I am a Targaryen. As I said, I do not need the reminder of what could have been had she lived." 298 AC, Margaery Tyrell. She had known what to expect from the marriage bed. Her grandmother had taught her what her husband would likely be like, incompetent and useless, being the key descriptors used, and how Margaery should seek to ensure her husband was satisfied enough that he never looked to another whilst simultaneously training him to ensure that he, eventually, was able to give her some pleasure as well. What she had not considered was what Robb Stark would be like in the marriage bed. Well, she had considered it. But only in so much a hoping he would be good,
there had still been that underlying worry that it would hurt and then be awful. And that she would have to do it nightly until he rode to war, but when he returned, a bit older and wiser, he might be better. Never had she been so pleased to be so wrong. It had hurt. But not much. And it had not been awful. Not at all. It had been good. Not great. But good. That had been nearly a moon ago. Now it was excellent. It was excellent at least twice a day. Sometimes more. She sighed and stared at the ceiling. Next to her, Rob stopped snoring and turned slightly. A few seconds later he was awake, staring at her. She could feel his eyes on her. "When you are worried, you scowl," he said eventually, his voice quiet. "And when you are worried, you deflect onto me," she murmured back. "What if we make an agreement?" he said gently. "You promise not to worry about me, and I promise not to worry about you." "That is a cruel promise to ask me to make," she replied, turning over to look at him. "For if you worry about me and forget yourself on the field of battle, you will die. But there is no harm for me when I worry for you. In fact, it is my duty, is it not? I wish for you to be happy, Margaery. I will be happy when this war is over, my family are safe and we can begin to build our life together," she muttered. "I am no fool, Rob. I know this war needs to be fought. But I know what war does to men. What happens to women." He hissed and moved away from her. "You think I would do that?" "No," she whispered. "But I worry that others will, and you will have to pick up the pieces of their mistakes. It will not be like that, I promise. Do not make promises you cannot keep. Not to me. What would you have me do then?" She did not speak for a moment, then she sighed. "I am sorry." "I understand," Rob murmured, his eyes sad. "But you must have faith." "I do." He sighed. "This is not what I expected either, Margaery. I thought that when I wed, I would have moons and years to get to know my wife. Instead, I have had a moon to know the woman I am to wed and a moon to have her as my wife. And now I ride off to war just like my father did all those years ago. But I promise you, I will sire no bastards and I will return to you. If I must fight the gods themselves, then I will. I do not know if you are incredibly brave, or incredibly stupid." He grinned at her, the same boyish grin that her first made he decide she wanted him. The stupid grin that he set this whole thing in motion. They could have gone south and from there they could, possibly, have sat the war out unscathed. They would likely have lost their titles and some land. But they would have all lived. But Robb Stark had changed that. Her soft heart had always been her weak spot. Grandmother always said it. But there was something about Robb Stark, who loved his brothers and sisters like she loved her brothers and who treated the servants with kindness, like she did, which appealed. His innocent charm that was becoming far less innocent by the day. She knew she had not been subtle about it, Willers knew, Sansa knew, she was fairly sure now that even Ned Stark knew. But she did not truly care that they knew, only that her actions would have consequences for her family. The only small chink of hope was that Grandmother had agreed to it. Grandmother had thought it a wise move. If Grandmother had said that she did not support such a move, Margaery would have listened. She would not have been happy about it, but she would have listened. But Grandmother had given her approval and that made the weight in her stomach feel that bit less heavy, sometimes. "I wanted a match with you too, you know," Robb murmured, as though reading her thoughts. "If I had not wished for you then I would not have let Sansa propose it. No one forced me. And when I return from this war, if I must spend the next 60 years proving that to you, I will." "Only 60?" He grinned. "I shall hope for 60 but pray for 80. Ambitious. I do not think it will take that long. But I'll gladly prove it over and over again." "Could you prove it right now?" ***. The thing about sex with Robb was that every time she had it, it got better. Which was both marvelous but also awful because she was sure it was going to kill her at some point. She heaved out a deep breath, desperately sucking air into her lungs and flipped herself off Robb and onto her back to lay next to him. Her nose wrinkled as she realized she had, inadvertently, thrown herself onto the evidence of their activities. "How can you look like that after we just did this? The act itself is enjoyable." "Enjoyable?" If you would let me finish, she retorted, tuning slightly so she could look at him. She lifted one hand to run it through his hair affectionately. The act itself is enjoyable. Very much so. But the aftermath I find less than satisfying. He huffed. Only you could make something so enjoyable sound so dirty. She laughed but cuddled up closer to him, resting her head on his chest. They settled into silence, both lost in their own thoughts for several minutes. If you see my brothers or my parents, will you give them my love? I had not quite expected to head north and never return. Not your grandmother. She knows. She always knows. Once this war is over, if you wish to return home every year for a moon or so, I would gladly let you, Margaery Robb said, his voice softer than usual. I know we married for a war, for my brother, but I do care for you, and I would have you happy. I would have us find a relationship like my parents did. She grinned slyly at him. I would say we are already halfway there. He raised an eyebrow. Grandmother always said if you can find satisfaction in the marriage bed, then you are already halfway to a happy marriage already. He laughed. And are you satisfied? She felt her grin grow slightly wicked. Mostly. Practice makes perfect, after all. I would say we should practice some more, my lady, but I fear if we do, I shall fall asleep on my horse today and embarrass myself in front of my bannerman. She laughed and then fell silent. You should not worry, Margaery Robb said more quietly, bringing one hand up to hold her face. I will be fine. We have the largest armies now that Lord Stannis has declared for himself. We have a dragon. It will not be easy, Robb, she whispered. Promise me you will not underestimate the Lannisters. That you will not underestimate Lord Stannis. He raised an eyebrow, but did, eventually, promise her. ****. Later that day she stood on the steps that led up to the great keep of Winterfell and watched as the Northern Lords and Mage Mormont mounted their horses. The whole household had gathered to bid farewell to the army. Margaery stood between Sansa and Rickon, her head held high and desperately trying not to let her emotions show as Ned Stark and his sons began to bid their goodbyes to the family. You have command, Ned said quietly to Bran, his voice only just carrying over to Margaery. There must always be a Stark in Winterfell, Bran. Bran sniffled slightly, but straightened in Hodder's arms as much as he could. As though to prove himself capable. Do not forget all that I have taught you, and do not forget you still have much to learn, Ned continued, cupping his hand around the back of Bran's head. Lord Willers has much experience in governing a keep larger than Winterfell and ensuring that bannermen are content and looked after. Your sister is wise beyond her years, Lady Margaery too. Ask them all for advice. Continue your lessons. He paused and glanced at Arya, who stood at the end of the line and was scowling at them. Mayhaps do not take too much advice from Arya though, else I may find I do not have a keep to come back to. Then he pressed a quick kiss to Bran's head and turned his attention to Rickon. You'll stick close to Lady Margaery and Sansa, Ned whispered as he crouched down so he was eye level with Rickon, who was still clinging to Margaery's hand. Listen to them. Be good. Then he pressed a kiss to Rickon's head and rose. He did not speak to Margaery, but pressed a quick kiss to one of her cheeks as he moved past her to Sansa and then from her to Arya. She watched as Jon and Robb began to make their way down to line to bid their own farewells. Jon went first, ruffling Bran's hair and leaning down slightly to kiss his brother's forehead and then whispering something in Bran's ear that had him nodding. He did the same to Rickon, who let go of Margaery's hand to fling himself into Jon's arms. Jon picked him up and held him close, then he turned to Margaery. Margaery will look after you, Jon said quietly. You said she was your favorite, remember? That she has been helping you with Shaggy Dog. When I come back, I expect that she will have helped you train him so well that he might be allowed into your chambers at night. Rickon's eyes widened the longer Jon had been talking. Really? What if Mother says no? Margaery watched as Jon's eyes hardened for a second and he paused. She spoke quickly, we'll prove to Lady Catelyn that Shaggy Dog can be trusted, won't we, Rickon? He's nearly there already. There was a slight moment where she thought Rickon would not agree, then he nodded enthusiastically and held out his arms. Grinning, she let Jon pass him over and carefully jostled Rickon so could wrap his arms around her neck, and she could hold him on her hip. Jon smiled gently at her, and she turned her cheek so he could press a kiss to it. Stay safe, your grace, she murmured. I'll bring him home, John replied, lingering by her cheek so he could breathe the words into her ear. She nodded her head slightly, letting him know that she had understood and was grateful. Then he moved away to Sansa. She glanced towards Robb, who had finished saying his goodbye to Bran and was now stood slightly to her left. Try not to get into mischief, he said, coming forward so he could rustle Rukn's hair. Listen to Margaery and your sisters. Rukn nodded but didn't speak. Robb smiled at Rukn and turned to her. He leaned over to press a kiss to her cheek, and when he pulled back slightly, he whispered, "Keep yourself busy. It will help." She felt herself nod. "Keep yourself safe." He pressed another kiss to her cheek. He moved quickly down the line after that, bidding farewell to Sansa, Willers and Arya. Once he was done, he mounted his own horse quickly and took his position next to his father at the front of the mounted bannermen. "We march south," Ned Stark called, his voice carrying in the silent courtyard, kicking his horse forwards. Next to him, Robb kicked his horse forward too. The Northmen yelled their approval, their roars sending the birds in the godswood flying. She watched as one by one the Northern lords followed Robb and Ned Stark out of the courtyard and began their march south. On foot, Jon Snow followed behind them and then veered sideways away from the marching army. There were a few minutes of silence other than the march of horses' hooves and men's feet as they began to make their way down the King's Road. Then Winter loosed a roar and launched herself into the sky above Winterfell. Margaery watched as Jon guided her in a few loops around Winterfell and the armies and then wheeled her around north. Winter disappeared above the clouds minutes later. Margaery sniffled slightly as she realized she could no longer see Robb and his father through the gate marching south, as their departure was now obstructed by thousands of men falling in behind them. There was a beat of silence and then those assembled began to make their way off to carry on with their day. If it hadn't been for the heavy air around them, it would have been like any other day in Winterfell. She watched as Gendry carefully took Arya and Sansa off to the Godswood. "So," Bran Willers said, his voice carefully light as though they had not just bid farewell to thousands of men who would not return. "Shall we take Margaery and Rukn to the kitchens and ask them to make some of that famous lemon bread?" 298 AC, Daenerys Targaryen. They had spent a moon in Meereen. It had been a moon too long. A moon of someone always being alert and on edge whilst the others rested and whilst Oren tried to find them passage back to Pentos. She had been horrified, at first, when she thought that Oren had links to Slavers Bay. She abhorred slavery, she had hated seeing it when she rode with the Dothraki, and she hated seeing it in Slavers Bay. She was smarter and more careful now. She was not going to try and change people's fates, for their choice was their own and she could not take the risk with her dragons still so young and a babe to care for. But she hated seeing it, nonetheless. She doubted that the clenching in her stomach and the anger that rippled through her when she saw slaves in the streets would ever truly vanish. She had spoken to Oren about House Valerian's links to Slavers Bay one night and had been, somewhat, reassured by his response, that as a sailor he had met hundreds, if not thousands, of men during his travels. It was them who had links to Slavers Bay and he just knew them. She could not imagine befriending someone who had slaves of their own, but she understood what he was saying, that it was better to have these allies and friends and call upon them when needed than isolate oneself. Allies were important and for a price, anyone could and would turn to their head to anything. Still, she did not like it. They had set sail only a few days ago. At first, she had kept her dragons close, but as they drew further away from Meereen and headed further into the bay, she let them free. They had been cramped up in Meereen, hiding in the room that Daenerys had taken for herself, and it was not good for them. She knew that stories of what happened to chained dragons. She would not let that happen to hers. She had spent the last 2 days on the deck of the ship watching as her children chased each other around the ship. Sometimes she was joined by Ser Jorah and sometimes by Oren. But most of the time she was alone. Viserys was not talking to anyone and one of either Ser Jorah or Oren was always watching him. With them occupied and her Dothraki companions seasick, she had spent more time alone in the last 2 days than she had in the last 2 moons. It was oddly peaceful. It gave her time to think and to reflect and to plan her next steps. Next to her, Oren shifted slightly and drew her attention away from her children and to him. "When we land in Driftmark, Oren," she began quietly, trying keep her voice low enough that only he could hear her. I would meet your brother straight away and find out all that has happened. Can we get word to him before then? Perhaps when we dock in Pentos. Oren shook his head quietly. Ravens would not make it across the sea. Only another ship could get a message to him, so we may as well wait. Very well, she replied. She paused and watched as Balerion and her still unnamed dragon, the one she thought had claimed her son as his, chased each other around their ship, little bursts of flames coming out of their mouth. Mzigan! She called, as one burst of flame came precariously close to singing the sails. There was a brief pause, then the unnamed dragon dropped down onto the wooden rail of the ship in front of where her and Oren stood. They had grown quickly, all three were now the size of small dogs. It had only been a few moons, yet they could now hunt and feed themselves. She was confident that, should they ever need to, they could defend themselves. Balerion, ever the stubborn dragon, and it grated on her that he was hers, because he was as stubborn as she was, flew off to pester his other brother. She huffed out slightly as she watched her black dragon chase Arion around their ship and could not help but wonder if he would ever show her the same affection that the others did. She had worried that by naming him after the dragon that Egon had rode that it would diminish her dragon somehow, for she had grown up on stories of Balerion, whose scales had been as black as tar and his teeth like swords. Yet, no other name seemed to fit him. And she had worried needlessly. Her dragon was doing everything possible to live up to his namesake. He had been the first to breathe fire, so hot that he had left the table the meat had been on burned black, and the first to fly. As he grew, the red on his scales and wings grew brighter and the black became deeper. Even now, the black was so dark and so powerful that it seemed that light was absorbed into his scales and wings. Small as he was, when he flew over her or the ship, he plunged whatever was under him into darkness. It was not just his shadow. It was him. All of him. When the sunlight passed through his brother's wings, the shadows under them were lighter. You could still make out the grain on the wood, for example, when they hovered over the ship's wooden rails, but Balerion gave no inch. She was sure that, if he had the chance to grow as big as his namesake, he could one day bathe the city not just in shadow but the sort of darkness that one might only find in the dead mines of the Valyrian freehold. The unnamed dragon let out a little trill and leaned his head towards her. She snapped her attention back to him and moved her arms slightly so that he could see Roigo. He crooned deeply and snuffled his head down to rest on her babe. The cream and gold dragon scales contrasted beautifully with her son's slightly darker coloring. The cream dragon crooned more loudly at her son and jostled him slightly with his snout. Then he pulled back and looked at Daenerys. He gave one low blink and a trill and then carefully extended his neck out so that he could press his head against her free hand. She ran her hand carefully across his neck and snout, maintaining eye contact as she did so. His gold eyes blinked once, and where Balerion or Arion would roll their eyes to the backs of their head when she fussed their snouts, this one did not. His intelligent eyes remained fixed on her as though he was trying to memorize her face. Unbidden, the name came to her. Jaerion, she murmured. For the Conciliator. For you are ferocious but also wise, knowing when to strike and when to back down, everything a true Targaryen dragon should be. He was the best and wisest of House Targaryen, and I think you might be the brightest of my children. You certainly seem to understand the most. He trilled loudly but stopped as Balron and Arion appeared either side of him, landing gently on the wooden railings as though they had heard what she had said and longed to refute her claims. Princess. Oren murmured. He had taken an instinctive step back, as everyone always did when her children appeared. Do not worry, she said without taking her eyes off her children. They are just jealous. They really are just like children. She carefully turned to pass Roigo to Oren and then turned back to move to the edge of the ship, pressed up against the railings so that her children could swarm her. She spent several moments basking in how close they were. It was different now. They were bigger and could spend nearly an hour at a time soaring over her ship. They did not come to her as much as they had done when they were smaller. They were independent now, or at least seemed to be getting that way. Balerion snapped at his brothers suddenly, sending them skittering slightly away up the railings, and then turned his full attention on her. His red eyes seemed to bore into her own, examining her, and, for a moment, she felt like he had found her lacking in some way. Like she was not enough. She sighed. Sister. Viserys' voice cut through her like a knife to the bone. They had not spoken well over a moon, Nearly 2. Their stay in Myrene had continued the silence between them. She had hoped the time in the city would remove the uncomfortable truth that had settled between them, that Viserys had to make a choice and, if he made the wrong one, that he would lose both her and Aerion. "Brother," she replied, trying to keep her voice level, strong and sure, and not letting it wobble. "Can we speak?" She nodded and took a step back, away from her dragons, and closer to Oren. She paused and leaned over to press a quick kiss to Rhaego's cheek and murmured, "Go and see Doria." She was complaining yesterday that she never gets to see her favorite babe. "He is the only babe on this ship," Oren replied. "He is both her favorite and her least favorite." She laughed. Oren made to turn away but was interrupted by Viserys. "She is in my cabin. You may wish to give her a few moments." Daenerys raised a brow and exchanged a quick look with Oren. He too quirked a brow but said nothing. Instead, he inclined his head and turned, heading below deck. Ser Jorah, who had been behind Viserys, lingered for a moment but, after meeting her eyes, turned and followed. For the first time in moons, Viserys and Daenerys were completely alone. She gestured to Viserys to join her against the railings. Together they stared out at Slavers Bay as their ship sailed smoothly through the still waters. They were heading south to Astapa, where they would resupply before they began their journey back to the Free Cities and, from there, to Westeros. "Mother crowned me king," Viserys said eventually. "She crowned me king after Rhaegar died, after father died. She crowned me king and she said it was my duty to look after you." She did not speak, instead she kept her eyes fixed on the sea. She had said all she needed to say to Viserys all those moons ago. What happened next was his choice. She had done all she could. She had begged. She had tried to reason with him. She had fought. And, finally, she had issued her ultimatum. "I have spent 5 and 10 years thinking I was to be king," Viserys whispered. 5 and 10 years. Since I was a boy, Dany. Yet, you tell me that I have failed, before I even truly began to stake my claim, and I could never hope to succeed now. I have failed, mother, and I have failed you. Again, she did not reply. "Did you mean what you said? That you would pick him?" She jerked her head in a nod, eyes still fixed on the sea. "I did not believe you at first. I thought that if I gave you time that you would change your mind. Yet you are here now," she replied, turning to look at her brother. "You're not going to change your mind," Viserys murmured. "You are like me." She did not speak. She knew what he was saying was not meant to be offensive, and it was not. They were both stubborn. They always had been. Even when everything had been right, when Sir William still lived, they had argued and bickered, Viserys always convinced he was right, and Daenerys always convinced she was. She sighed, glancing back to the sea. "Mother crowned me, king. She made me promise to care for you. How can I fail her twice?" Viserys' voice cracked. She froze, suddenly realizing what this was about. "This is about mother," she whispered, turning to really look at her brother. "Always. Mother is dead, Viserys. We are all that remains. You. Me. Our nephew. Rhaego. We are the last of House Targaryen and we must support each other. We cannot argue between ourselves. She made me promise. She said I was to be king. I promised I would be. For her," Viserys snapped. "I have already failed her once. I cannot do so again. She is dead, Viserys. Gone. And if she was here, she would not crown you king. Don't speak of her like you know her. You killed her." She reared back as though he had hit her. "So that is it." They stared at each other for a few moments. Then all the fight seemed to leave Viserys. If she was still here, it would be different. My life would have been different. 5 and 10 years. Most of my life I have been destined to be king. Now you tell me it is all a lie. It was all I have. You have me, she whispered. It is not the same, Viserys murmured, turning to stare out at the ocean. The crown, it was to be mine. Just mine. Something for me. She sighed, closing her eyes as she did so. She did not open them as she spoke. Mother died, and you were left with me to raise. You say that the crown was just yours, brother, but I was yours. I am yours. Your sister. She sucked in a deep breath, opening her eyes to look at her brother as she whispered, "Do you wish she had lived, and I had died?" He did not speak for a moment. Often. But not always. Not always. It used to be always, did it not? She murmured. You sold me, brother. You let me be raped every day and every night by my husband. You sold me for an army that was never going to fight for you. And before that, you tortured me for your amusement. For years. Because you could. It was his turn to rear back now, his eyes wide and anger beginning to bloom in them. She cut him off before he could speak. You could have let me die though. That day, when Drogo fell and Quotho came for me, you could have let me die. But you saved me. You drew your own sword to protect me. And before that, you could have left me. There were so many times when you could have left me to die when we were children. You might say that you wished she had lived, and I had died, that you used to wish it more than you do now. But I think you do not mean it. Not truly. You're my sister. Mine Viserys snapped. I hate you. I resent you. Sometimes I have even wished you gone. But you are my sister, Dany. And you are my brother, Viserys. They did not speak for a moment, staring at each other. She would hate me, Viserys said after a few moments. She was kind and good. She would hate me. Hate who I am. She would love you, Viserys. As I do, she murmured. For all that you have done, you are still my brother. She glanced away, back out to sea, watching as the dragons squealed with joy as they chased each other around and around in circles. Next to her, Viserys leant more heavily against the railings. She did not need to look at him to know he was likewise looking at the dragons. I could not have brought them back, he said suddenly. You do not know that. I do, Dany, he whispered. I can feel it. So can you. You were right, Aerion would follow you over me, even if I am his. Why did you name him Aerion? Aerion Brightflame was not a man to be admired. He was the worst of our house. Why name such a magnificent creature after him? She asked, trying to cling to the new conversation and draw Viserys out rather than have him focus on his sadness and suffering. Viserys started next to her. You think I named him after Brightflame? He sighed. I named him for the first Aerion. Aegon the Conqueror's father, she murmured, realization flooding through her. The man who sired the 3 Targaryens that united Westeros. I could not name him Aegon, Viserys replied, turning slightly. She turned so they were looking at each other again. He and the others are our fresh start, Dany. They are our chance to go home. To rebuild our family. He sighed and glanced away from her again. I will follow you, sister. For without you, I am nothing. Without Aerion, I am nothing. Do not follow me for that reason, Viserys, she whispered, placing her hand carefully on his arm that was closest to her. Never follow me. Come with me. Stand by my side as we return to Westeros. Stand by my side as our dragons grow big enough to ride. Help me support our nephew. Let us show Westeros that House Targaryen has returned. United. As your equal. He asked, hope in his voice as he turned back to look at her again. Yes. He did not reply for a moment. His eyes were fixed on hers. I would never have made that offer to you. She smiled sadly and then heaved in a deep breath, closing her eyes as she spoke. No. You would not. But I would still rather return with you than without you. I meant what I said, brother, we are all each other have. I do not want to fight with you. I do not want to pick our nephew over you. I want us to go home, together. I was us to fight, together. You mean it? She opened her eyes and stared up into Viserys' eyes. He was staring at her with wide, pleading, desperate eyes. Tears pooled in her eyes, mirroring his. Then she nodded. I'm sorry, Dany, he whispered. His voice cracked and he sounded like the little boy who had held her in his arms as they fled through Bravos all those years before. He paused for a moment, then he opened his arms slightly. It was a tiny gesture, barely more than a twitch, but she did not even think before she threw herself into his arms, wrapping herself as tightly around him as she possibly could. His arms wrapped back just as tightly around her, pulling her more closely against him. His head rested on top of her head, and she felt tears dripping down into her short hair, slipping off the tips and dropping from there onto her own face where they mingled with her tears. "I am so sorry." The sun was low in the sky when they pulled apart. Viserys held her at arm's length, his eyes searching hers for forgiveness. He had to hear it, she realized. He had to know. She did not speak for a moment. Then she sucked in a deep breath and, for the first time since she was a child, she said, "Will you tell me about her? About Mother?" The smile that washed over his face at her words was both heartbreakingly sad, filled with grief and despair, and yet breathtakingly beautiful and filled with joy at the same time. He nodded, and despite his bloodshot eyes and running nose, she finally saw some life in her brother's eyes. "Yes." Interlude, 298 AC, Benjen Stark. He had known Aemon a long time. Nearly half his life. Long enough to have spent most of that time wondering when he would have to bid goodbye to his friend. He knew Aemon was old and likely did not have many years left, and yet, as the years slipped by, Aemon stayed. Seasons changed. Men came and went. Lived and died. And Aemon was there. Always. Then Benjen had brought Jon to Castle Black and spilled his most shameful secret to Aemon. He had watched as Aemon seemed to age before his eyes. The man's grim face became less stern and more relaxed, his eyes seemed to regain a sparkle that only the youth had, and his frail body suddenly seemed so much less frail. Mayhaps it was just Benjen's perception of the man that had changed, but he could not help but think Aemon could live another 10 years now. Likely longer than Benjen. "You managed to make the Lord Commander agree," Aemon remarked as he watched Benjen throw the saddlebags over his horse and carefully tie them to his saddle. "Jon is returning to Winterfell," Aemon said eventually. "Your brother wrote. They march to war. I can't delay. I have lingered here too long already." "I know. You'll tell him, if he comes back north." Aemon nodded. They were alone in the courtyard except the one man who guarded the gate by the tunnel that led under the wall. The sun had not yet risen properly in the sky and the pre-dawn light was only just enough to see by. Yet, despite that, Aemon still glanced around carefully before he walked carefully across the slightly ice courtyard towards where Benjen stood. "Herbs and remedies," Aemon murmured, pushing a pouch into Benjen's hands. "You have never given me anything before. You have never fought against the Lord Commander's orders before. You agree," he breathed. "You think something is wrong." "I think that you are right," Aemon said, his voice cautious. "Something happened, something that caused the likely death of 3 good, experienced, rangers." He did not reply, instead he tightened his grip around the pouch and turned to push it carefully into his saddlebag. He glanced back to look at Aemon and swallowed when he saw the look in them. It was a look he knew he had given Aemon many times. The eyes that said he hoped that he would see him again but expected not to. The eyes of a man bidding goodbye to his friend. He had given it to Aemon, at least, 100 times over the years. Yet now, it was Aemon looking at Benjen with those eyes. He paused for a moment and then pulled Aemon in for a short but firm hug. When he stepped back, he glanced around them to make sure they were still alone and said, "I plan to travel for about a moon. If I am not back within 2 moons, ensure the Lord Commander stops any future rangings until more reinforcements arrives. I will take no risks. I will be careful." Aemon nodded sharply, taking a step back and drawing his furs more tightly around him. He likewise took another step back, closer to his horse. Then he turned and untied its reins from where he had looped them over a stump. Sighing, he swung himself up onto the horse's back. He shifted slightly to get comfortable and kicked his horse away from the stables and towards the gate. He paused as the man near it hurried to begin the process of easing it up and, unable to help himself, he glanced back at Aemon, who was still looking at him with the same, sad, eyes. He flinched and ripped his eyes away from Aemon and turned his attention to the gate as it began to slide up to allow him access into the lands beyond the wall. He straightened his back, kicked his horse into a trot and kept his eyes fixed on the tunnel, acutely aware of Aemon's eyes burning holes into his back. Chapter 19, Claim. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary, Jon and Aemon reunite. Oberyn speaks to Doran. Olenna gets the news she was hoping for. In our interlude, Aemon and Jon discuss Aerion, 298 AC, Jon Snow. He guided Winter down to land right outside the south gate of Castle Black, trusting that the number of Targaryen loyalists within the Night's Watch would stop the others from doing anything foolish. He had heard their screams from a distance, but as soon as Winter landed, silence reigned. He dismounted quickly, sliding down her back and turning to find Winter already having swung her neck around to look at him. Her eyes moved from him to the gate and back again, and he laughed. "He will come out later, you'll see him soon, I promise," he murmured. "Go hunt." She snorted, much like a horse or ghost would do, and a bit of smoke drifted out of her mouth. But she did as bid, turning away from him and launching herself into the air with a few sharp cracks of her wings. He watched her climb steadily and then bank sharply away from the wall and towards the gift where she was most likely to find something to satisfy her appetite. They had flown hard, making the journey from Winterfell in a little over a week. The distance between Winterfell and Greywater Watch and Winterfell and the Wall was similar, although the Wall was, mayhaps, half a day's flight further. Yet, Winter was still young and continuing to grow, and so he was unsurprised that they had made such good time. It was good news and gave him confidence that he would rejoin the army quicker than he had hoped. Once she was out of sight, he turned back to the south gate which had opened and inhaled. Then he straightened his shoulders, pulled his cloak more tightly around his shoulders and headed into Castle Black. He was not sure what he had expected when he entered the courtyard of Castle Black. But what he had not expected was to find the men of the Night's Watch lined up across the battlements and around the courtyard, waiting for him. His eyes drifted over the familiar faces, catching the eye of one or two he knew had been Targaryen loyalists who inclined their head minutely but did nothing more. He moved his eyes from the men to the steps that led up to where the common hall was and could not help but smile when his eyes fixed on his uncle. Their eyes met and a small, quick, smile flitted over Aemon's face. He pulled his eyes away quickly, not wanting to be caught staring, and instead met the blank expression of Lord Commander Mormont. The Lord Commander met his gaze head-on and then seemed to sigh and began walking down the steps into the courtyard. Jon continued walking, slowing his steps slightly so he could meet the man halfway, far away from all the men watching them. "Jon Snow," Lord Commander Mormont said, holding out his arm so that Jon might grasp it. "We had not thought to see you again." "I had not thought to come here again," he replied, gripping the man's arm tightly. "A lie. But a necessary one." He watched as Commander Mormont's eyebrow rose. Clearly, he did not believe the lie. "Will it be a long stay?" He shook his head at the same time as he released the man's arm. "No, a day or so." "Your uncle Benjen is not here, if he is why you have come north," Lord Commander Mormont said. He turned, gestured slightly, and together they began walking towards the battlements that Aemon waited on, surrounded by other brothers of the Night's Watch. "It is not Benjen I have come to see," he murmured. "I did not think it was," the other man replied. "We shall take no parts in the wars to come. But you will always be welcome here whilst I am Lord Commander, Your Grace." "Thank you, Lord Commander." The man nodded. "Back at it, men. Nothing to see here." The men dispersed, heading back towards the common hall. A few, including Sir Alisa Thorne, lingered for a moment, their eyes flicking from Jon to Aemon and back again before they too dispersed. Once they were gone and it was just Jon and Aemon alone, he waited for his uncle to carefully make his way down the rickety steps into the courtyard. His uncle looked older than he had done moons before when Jon had said goodbye. Yet his eyes were bright, and his mouth turned up. The second Aemon was on the level surface of the courtyard. Jon crossed the last few steps and pulled his uncle in for a hug. "Uncle," he breathed, wrapping his arms tightly around Aemon until the maester was wrapped so tightly against him he could feel the man's breath against his neck. "Jon, Uncle," Aemon whispered, his frail arms tightening around Jon. "It is good to see you. You look well." He pulled back. "Uncle Benjen." "Beyond the wall. He has gone to scout for the missing rangers. Alone. He thought it wiser, less likely to draw attention." He nodded. "Winter has gone to hunt. So, we have time." Aemon smiled, soft and pleased, and murmured, "Winter." It felt right. "Come, let us head to my chambers. If I am not wrong, Sir Alisa will likely come by with some food for both of us shortly." ****. Aemon was, of course, not wrong.
Sir Alisa did come by, not only with 2 bowls of steaming stew but also 2 large mugs of ale. He looked like he wanted to speak to John, but he was smart enough not to try and push ahead of Eamon, who had been waiting at his desk, ready for his food. Once they had both eaten their full, John eating half of Eamon's as well as his own, John settled down on the bed and waited for his uncle to speak. Eamon watched him carefully for a few moments, a soft smile on his face. "You do truly look well, nephew," Uncle Eamon said quietly. "But I do not think you are here to speak about your health. You would not have come here with Winter if you were not ready to make your claim. Robert Baratheon is dead, we heard the news. But what else has changed? The children, Robert's, they are not his." Uncle Eamon sat up straighter, his eyes widening slightly before they turned pensive. "You are sure? They are the children of Sir Jaime and Cersei," he said quietly. "And we believe that my brother, Bran, witnessed an indiscretion of theirs and was pushed from the window for it. Tell me everything." And he did. He spoke and then, when his mouth grew parched and he finished his own ale, he quaffed his uncle's and continued to speak. Eventually, when he was finished, he leaned against the wall that the bed was against and sighed. "Ned Stark is very smart," Uncle Eamon said eventually, his voice carefully level. "But how do you feel, John? Your father decided to press your claim without asking you." "Yes, he had no choice in many ways. He had to call his banners, for the Lannisters would have killed him, and you cannot march to war without an idea of who you will put on the throne, and yet in many ways he did have a choice. He could have decided that a great council would be the best way. He could have thrown his support by Stannis." "I am not sure how I feel," he replied. "That father immediately thought of me and my claim when he realized what had happened. It means so much. To know I had his support, even when he did not know whether I wished to press my claim, yet he also managed to back me into a corner whilst he did it. I had thought to wait. But, if not now, then when? I do not think I will get a better justification for claiming the throne, nor one where the stars align so well." "You have grown up," Uncle Eamon remarked quietly. That was the answer of a man. He grimaced. "I do not feel like a man. I still feel like that small boy who came to Castle Black half a year ago. He is dead, John. The boy is dead. He has been since the day the egg hatched for you. You knew then that this day would come. And you sit before me now, a man wise enough to understand the actions of others, however frustrating they might be, and ready to do what needs to be done for the good of the realm." He grimaced again. "You are too free with your praise, uncle." "Not free enough, I think," his uncle replied quietly. "You have grown so much in the last few moons, you do not realize how much." John watched as Eamon shifted slightly in his chair and let out a contented sigh. The Jon Snow who came to Castle Black all those moons ago would have been furious that his father had dared to make such a move, to use his claim in such a way, without consultation. He would have fought and argued every step of the way and felt sorry for himself whilst he did it. Yet, the Jon Snow before me now, he is frustrated, but he does not let it cloud his judgment. He recognizes why his father did what he needed to do. It does not mean he is happy, but he understands. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Instead, John fixed his gaze on one of the broken tiles near the fireplace and occupied himself with trying to will the pinkness in his cheeks to go away. "I am glad you came," Eamon said eventually, his voice quiet. "There is a matter I wished to discuss with you." He whipped his head back around to his uncle, unable to stop the worry he felt inside from creeping onto his face. "What is wrong?" "The other egg," Eamon said quietly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper as though the egg in question might hear him. "I can feel it." He froze, feeling the blood leaving his face. His mouth opened and closed of its own accord and he was unable to stop his eyes flicking back to the fireplace. "How bad is it?" "We have time." He released an exhale of air, slumping slightly. "Thank the old gods." Eamon smiled sadly at him. "Something is wrong, I can see it on your face, uncle." "Something is bothering me," nephew, Eamon agreed. "That egg has been silent as a tomb for the last 60 years. Longer. I have never felt anything from it. Even you could barely feel yet. Yet now, it's there. All day. Every day. Something has changed." It came out as a question even though he knew he was right. Eamon nodded slowly.
Something has happened. It could be because of Winter's birth, magic knows magic, after all, but I cannot help but think it is something else. ****. Winter had arrived back at Castle Black before the sun reached its highest point in the sky. John could still feel her fleeting, for she was still hungry, and he could feel her desire for more food seeping out of her even as she flew in loops over Castle Black, satisfaction at the buck she had taken down and her smugness at the fact that, only a few moons ago, she was smaller than the buck. He grinned up at the sky as she flew overhead, letting out a loud roar that reverberated off the wall, before she banked and pulled up to land again outside the walls of Castle Black. "It would appear that she is impatient," Nephew Eamon remarked from his place next to John. He took his uncle's offered arm and carefully escorted the man across the empty courtyard of Castle Black and towards the south gate. Winter had landed 100 feet from the gate. As they came out from under the gate, she tipped her head back and let loose another roar, and this time unmistakable frustration tinged the edges of it. She was still roaring when she snapped her neck forward with surprising speed and then charged them, her legs moving quicker than John had expected whilst her wings unfurled, seemingly to make her half fly, half run towards them. She did not slow down as launched herself across the ground in their direction and only stopped when her snout was inches away from Eamon. He watched in fascination as her white eyes slowly closed and she seemed to inhale Eamon's scent. Her entire body relaxed, and when she finally opened her eyes again a few moments later, and blinked lazily at them, he was not shocked when he could see the emotions as clearly in her eyes as he felt through the bond. "My beautiful girl," Eamon crooned, stepping away from John and raising his hand towards Winter. He stopped short, his hand a hair's breadth from her snout, and then closed the remaining distance just as she did, his hand bumping into her snout at the tip and then moving up towards her eye as she moved her head closer towards him. "How you have grown." John could not help but blink back tears at the emotions he could feel pouring off Winter. He did not think he even needed the bond to feel it. Surely any man, woman or child looking at Eamon and Winter would see what he saw, love. It was almost as though John had ceased to exist, for the two of them were so fixated on each other that he did not think they even remembered he was there. A lesser man would likely have felt jealousy, but all John could feel was joy. Joy that someone understood the bond he had with Winter. Loved her like he did. And that Winter had someone else who saw her for what she was, intelligent, fierce and alive. Not just a dragon. "Nephew." He jerked away from staring at Winter to look at his uncle. "I had forgotten," he said quietly. "I had forgotten just how much she cares for you." Eamon's eyes grew wet, and he turned away slightly, fixing his attention back on Winter. "Daeron told me once that when the dragons of old lost their riders that they would take refuge in the Dragonmont or in the Dragon Pit. That they would wait, 100 years if they had to, for a new rider. They did not want to be alone. They could have gone anywhere," Eamon murmured, running his hand along Winter's snout until it rested just under her eye. She blinked lazily, once, and then snorted. "A dragon that has taken a rider could go anywhere, do anything. When they are that big, as Winter is now, they can protect themselves, and yet those that lose their riders chose to stay in the Dragon Pit. I thought that they were chained." "Remember Balerion," Nephew Eamon replied. "He was nearly 150 name days when he was confined to the Dragon Pit. Do you truly believe he would have stayed there if he did not wish to be there? That a few men could stop him? You are no fool. Balerion, like Vermithor and Silvering in Dragonstone, chose to stay. You think they waited? That they stayed in the hopes of another rider coming for them?" He watched his uncle nod. "I think that once a dragon has known a rider, truly known and bonded with that rider, that they are almost two halves of a whole. And when the rider dies, the dragon waits for another. But some didn't take the first man or woman that crossed their path who had the blood of the dragon," he murmured. "Dozens died trying to claim dragons during the dance, even those who had Valyrian blood. Just because someone has the blood of the dragon, it does not mean they are right for a dragon," his uncle murmured quietly. "There is a reason, nephew, that Winter hatched for you when she never did for me." He flinched. "I am not a better choice for her than you were. She chose you. She cares for me, it is obvious, and I care for her. But I was not destined for her. Why did she not pick you?" he asked, frustration seeping into his voice. "When she was placed in your crib as a boy, there was nothing to stop you being her rider. Nothing. Unless you plan on asking her, I do not think you will ever get your answer. He sighed and watched as his uncle's hand drifted along Winter's snout before she pulled back. She leaned her neck around Eamon slightly to shove it against Jon's chest and let out a soft snort, a stream of smoke escaping. His uncle sighed, wrapping his cloak more tightly around him. There is a reason these things happen, Jon. There is a reason why she hatched for you and not for me. There is a reason why she has grown so quickly. There is a reason why I still have my sight and my wits at an age when most other men have been dead for decades. You speak of the gods? He asked, glancing away from Winter to look at his uncle. Gods. Fate. Magic. It is all the same, in the end. He grimaced, turning back to Winter. I can only stay a few nights. And you do not wish to speak anymore on this? He shook his head. Then let us discuss the other matters that weigh you down. In front of him, as though sensing his frustration, Winter snorted and backed away. Then she turned, took several steps and launched herself into the air. ****. He had not wanted to go back to his uncle's solar after Winter had left them outside Castle Black. The knowledge that the other egg was growing closer to hatching weighed heavily on him and, as silly as he knew it sounded, he had asked his uncle if they could go as far away from the egg as possible. And so, for the first time in over 40 years, his uncle made his way to the top of the wall. If the men of the Night's Watch up there thought it strange, they did not comment. Instead, they all carefully shuffled away from the furthest brazier and clustered around the other 5 instead, leaving Eamon and Jon to their own. Jon had inclined his head in their direction when he realized what the men had done but did not say anything. He leant over the brazier holding his hands closer than any other man would. He caught his uncle raising an eyebrow, doing likewise, but otherwise Eamon did not comment. I have secured the Reach, through my brother's marriage to Lady Margaery, and I have the Riverlands and the North, he began. He glanced away from the fire towards his uncle, then continued, Lord Stannis has declared for himself, the Raven arrived the day before we departed, and he claims that Joffrey and his siblings are bastards born of incest. That is helpful, his uncle replied. Many men speak highly of Lord Stannis, of his honor and the strength of his word. If he has called the children this, more are likely to believe it. Likewise with your father. It will help in your efforts in securing support from houses that otherwise might have proved more reluctant. He nodded. I believe House Lannister will look to secure the Vale. They will need to, if they stand any chance of defeating one of their enemies, let alone both you and Stannis. Robb thinks the Vale will declare for me. You disagree? I think that Lysa Arryn set this whole war in motion through a letter she wrote to Lady Catelyn declaring that the Lannisters had killed her husband. And she wrote it so blatantly, uncle. She took a great risk in sending something like that, and I cannot help but think it was purposeful. His uncle hummed but did not reply for a moment. Have you shared your concerns with your father or brother? No. Because of Lady Catelyn? Yes. I think you are right. But I must ask, why would Lady Arryn wish to start a war? I do not know, he replied. But there is something strange about this, uncle. If she was truly so scared of the Lannisters, why did she write that letter? Why risk herself or her son? His uncle hummed again and then glanced up at him and smiled. So, the Vale and Dawn are out. The Lannisters and Stannis Baratheon will, between them, swoop up the Stormlands, Westerlands and Crownlands. The Lords of the Narrow Sea will do as House Valyrian bids until their time comes. They cannot declare for you now, to do so would be foolish. What do I do about Lord Stannis? What do you think you should do? He grimaced. I do not know, he muttered. Turning slightly so his eyes fixed on the haunted forest, he watched as a murmuration of starlings suddenly emerged from the trees closest to them and flew straight towards the wall before banking sharply and skimming their wings along its edge. We had always worked on the idea that I would need to fight House Lannister and House Baratheon together, he said eventually, his eyes moving from the starlings and back towards the haunted forest. But what if there is a way to convince Lord Stannis to back my claim? He has the smallest armies. The Lords of the Narrow Sea will support my claim over his, even if they cannot do so openly, and, although after me he has the most valid claim, Father has been clear that Stannis does not have the hearts of the small folk nor the lords and ladies of Westeros.
Men have fought greater odds than Lord Stannis faces, and one Aemon replied quietly, moving slightly closer to the brazier in front of him. The men from the Stormlands that we have here all report that he is sour, stubborn and dutiful. A poor combination, he remarked. Then he sighed again and rolled his shoulders slightly. You have an idea. I do, he murmured. But I do not know if it is a bad idea or not. You will listen and withhold judgment until I have finished. Of course. I believe I should offer to betroth my first daughter to a son of Lady Shireen. Or I should offer to make a match between Viserys and Lady Shireen, he began. Lady Shireen has dragon's blood, it might be distant, but it is there nonetheless, and a match between her son and a future daughter of mine might prove enough of a merger of the blood of old Valyria. And it could fix the feud between our families. And a match with Viserys. He is several years her senior. Viserys is my heir until I have children of my own. If he and Shireen have a child and I should pass without an heir, their child would take the throne. Do you think Lord Stannis will be persuaded by that? No. But you would offer him both, regardless. He will lose, uncle, he said quietly. He does not have the men or the support. At best he might be able to take the throne from the Lannisters, but he could never hold out against my forces. Surely, he will see that, and he will think of his daughter. You would be surprised what men will do when they think they are right, Aemon murmured. Or when they are blinded by hate or vengeance or justice. What would you suggest I do? Write to Lord Stannis, Aemon said, turning away from the haunted forest and staring at Jon with his pale eyes. Offer to send someone to meet with a person of his choice in neutral territory, somewhere in or near the Vale of Arryn, mayhaps just outside of Gulltown, and discuss terms. You do not think I should offer to go to Dragonstone myself? No. If something were to happen, the Lords loyal to you would be put in a difficult position, and there is no guarantee that someone would not look to take advantage of you being so far away from any support. I have no one to send, he said quietly. The Northern Army have marched, and even if they had not, there is no one I would trust to negotiate with Lord Stannis except you and I. Aemon gave him a weak smile. That is very kind of you to say, Jon, he murmured. But you need to trust other people to support you. However, in this case, I do not think that will be a problem. Uncle. You will go. You just said I should not go to Dragonstone. I did, Aemon replied, smiling at him. Dragonstone is dangerous. But Gulltown. Stannis would be wise not to send his full forces there, it would leave him too exposed. No. He will send a few men and his negotiator. And you will go there with Winter. Leave her out of sight but close enough to intervene if you need her. Talk to his negotiator in person, let them see you for who you are. If Lord Stannis is anything like he has been described, then whoever he sends to negotiate will have his utmost trust. Use it. 298 AC, Oberyn Martell. This is a surprise, Doran said, his voice barely above a whisper as they sat on the balcony of his solar and watched as the sun began to dip behind the walls of the water garden. They were completely alone in both the solar and in their perusal of the gardens. The children had long since been sent to bed, the long summer days making it appear earlier in the day than it truly was, and those that did not need to be asleep so early were making their own entertainment. Ellaria was with her father in Hellholt and not due to return for at least another moon, and so, for once, Oberyn was able to give Doran his undivided attention. No children to pester them and no Ellaria to distract Oberyn. I did not think it true, he said quietly. I did not wish to think it true. Doran turned to look at him. What are your thoughts on this, brother? You have known for a moon. I have known for but a few minutes. I know you will have thought on this and nothing else since the spider told you. He shifted slightly to get comfortable and then leaned forward on his chair, elbows anchored on the arms of his chair, and scoffed. I say to you, brother, what I said to the spider. If it is a choice between House Stark and House Lannister, then it is no choice. My quarrel is with House Lannister and with Rhaegar. Rhaegar is dead. House Lannister are not. Whilst Tywin Lannister lives and breathes, whilst Gregor Clegane lives and breathes, and whilst Amory Lorque lives and breathes, I would take a demon to my bed if I thought I would get vengeance for our sister and for our niece and nephew. You would help put Rhaegar's bastard on the throne. I would support whatever cause gave us the opportunity for vengeance.
Do not mistake that for supporting that boy's claim. Doran turned to look at him, eyes flinty and searching. Then, eventually, his brother inclined his head and turned his eyes back to the water gardens. Rumors from the north suggest that Robb Stark has wed Margaery Tyrell, Doran said a few moments later. You know what this means? He raised an eyebrow. A willing match. Reports vary. He felt his eyebrow creep higher. And your views, brother? I do not believe Eddard Stark capable of forcing a girl to wed his son against her will. A willing match then. And one that Lady Olenna will have agreed. She cannot know, surely. I would not be so sure, Doran murmured, his finger tracing the rim of his glass as he contemplated his answer. If we agree that Lord Stark would not have forced a girl to wed his son against her will, then the only solution is that Lady Olenna agreed to the match. The only reason that Lady Olenna would have agreed to a match was because it brought her closer to the throne. There is no love between House Stark and House Lannister, you said as much yourself, brother, so she cannot think that the match will bring her closer to the throne that way. Joffrey is now without a girl to take for wife given Sansa Stark fled north with her father. Surely it is reasonable to assume that Margaery would have been the best choice of the remaining candidates. Doran abruptly set down his glass on the table between them and leaned forwards, eye gleaming. No. Lady Olenna knows. Or she has guessed. Either way, she has thrown her support behind this boy, this Jon Snow. Oberyn was silent for a few moments, trying to think through next steps. Strategic thinking was not something that came naturally to him, he had no patience for it, and he far preferred to act and face the consequences of those actions. But, even with his preference for action, he knew that this was not a time for that. They needed to be careful. Cautious. What of Viserys and Daenerys? He asked, his voice nearly as quiet as Doran's had been. Viserys and Arianne. Viserys' claim is true. Jon Snow will have the support of the North, the Riverlands and the Reach, Doran replied, leaning back against his chair. Stannis will pursue his own claim. House Lannister will sweep up the Crown Lands and the Westerlands. Let them fight. What if Stannis bends the knee in exchange for a match? Or in exchange for Storm's End? Doran remained silent, pensive, his eyes fixed on the gardens below them. You have thoughts, brother. I would hear them. You wished for Arianne to be queen, he began. It is clear that, whatever happens, she will not be queen. If Jon Snow ascends the throne, he will not wed in Dorne. We both know he will not take that risk. If he does not ascend the throne, the North will look to place one of their own there instead, or Lord Stannis. That will mean a match between the North and one of the other kingdoms who supported Jon Snow's claim, or a match between the North and Lady Shireen to tie them together that way. The North is the key here, brother. Whatever happens, they will decide who ends up on that throne. And you would have us support the boy who is proof of what Rhaegar did to Elia. Who lives whilst our niece and nephew do not. You said you would not. Yet now it seems you would. I would have us on the right side of history, brother, he replied. We have worked for the downfall of House Lannister since the day the Raven came telling us that Elia and our niece and nephew were dead. Everything we have done. Every move we have made. Every friendship we have cultivated. It has all been for vengeance. This is a step I cannot countenance, brother. Then do not, he said quietly, his voice dropping again. Send me north again. Let me ride out to Highgarden. Let me find out what is happening. We cannot decide what we are to do, what we do about Viserys and Arianne, if we do not know the truth of what is happening. Doran did not speak for several minutes. Then he sighed. Ride, brother. Ride north and meet with this boy. Find out all you can and then return to me. Then we shall decide what is to be done. I do not wish to support this boy, but if there is a way for vengeance, then I would have us take it. We can decide the boy's fate later. He nodded. Ellaria. She and the girls can stay here. I will send word to Lord Eula, Doran said, his eyes moving away from the water features and statues to fix on Oberyn. I will send for Arianne. She is a woman grown now, and if she is to rule Dorne one day, then it is time I extended my hand. Although his brother's voice did not change, it remained the same level of depth and speed that it always did. Oberyn recognized the concern within it and the slight inflection on the word Dorne,
his brother had accepted that Arianne would not ascend the throne. At least not soon, because it could be done, if Jon Snow was disposed of after the war was won, but it was not something Doran was openly considering. He could see his brother's concern as well, in the tightening of his brother's shoulders and the way his little finger on his right hand flexed, like it always did when Doran worried. She will take it, brother, the gap between you is not yet so wide that she does not wish to reconcile. 298 AC, Olenna Tyrell. Olenna. Proof found. The claim is true. We'll keep it safe until told otherwise. Malara. Well, she murmured, eyes fixed on the scroll that bared the Mad Maid's writing. This is interesting. Lady Olenna. She glanced up at Lomis. You had another scroll, you say? Leave it here. I will write back as necessary and bring the scrolls to the rookery at sundown. He nodded, carefully dropping another scroll on her desk. Then he inclined his head and left the room, leaving her alone. She did not move for a few minutes, instead she waited until the sound of his footsteps had grown quiet and then faded into nothing as he left her wing of Highgarden. Then, once she was content she was as alone as she could be, given the presence of left and right outside her solar, she let a smile slip over her face. Oh, to have good news for once. Then she sighed. A true-born Targaryen, of the right age and right disposition, because there was no way Ned Stark could have raised a monster, and yet Margaery had decided she wished for Robb Stark. Yet, Olenna had spoken true when she had told Aeleri that a child of Margaery's might wed a child of Jon Snow's one day. So, mayhaps, it was not all for naught. House Tyrell still had a chance to grow strong. She did not have time to dally. The ravens had flown not a few days ago calling the banners. The houses closest would arrive within the next few weeks. Within a moon or so every bannerman in the Reach would be at Highgarden and she needed a plan. She needed to give them a reason to fight for Jon Snow, or whatever his actual name was, and she needed something better than because he is Rhaegar's son or because my granddaughter wanted Robb Stark and so wed him. She pulled another scroll closer to her. Mayhaps this one would give her the answers she needed. Grandmother. Cousin Paxter would do well to delay his trip until winter arrives. Willers. She closed her eyes, considering her options carefully, and leaned back against her chair. Then she opened them again, pushed her chair back from her desk so she could stand and then crossed over to stare out of her solar window. The sun was still low in the sky, not yet having fully crested the horizon, but much of the land around Highgarden was still bathed in an early morning light. She turned her attention from the Mandaeor rushing by to the outer courtyard, just discernible if she craned her neck around and peered slightly over the window ledge. If she was correct, which she usually was, it was Garland was out in the courtyard practicing. She watched for a few moments before she was content that, yes, it was her grandson, and then turned her attention back to the Mandaeor. He was a good swordsman. A very good swordsman. But not a commander. He had never led troops into battle. He understood the theory, not the practice. Yet, he should be with the Tyrell troops. With Loras off doing God's knows what with Renly Baratheon, she needed a Tyrell on the battlefield. Preferably one who was not Mace. She huffed. It could be Mace, she supposed, but if so, he would need someone strong and capable of steering him away from stupidity. Someone of a similar age, too young and they would be arrogant and foolish, and too old, and they would patronize him. Someone intelligent but not boastful. Someone, preferably, with a son or a daughter of a similar age to one of her grandchildren. She paused, considering her options. Not that there were many. In truth, there was only one option. She needed Randil Tully. She crossed her room faster than she usually would and opened her solar door. Without looking at left or right she barked out, "One of you go and get Garland, he is in the outer courtyard, tell him it is urgent. The other one, go and saddle Willer's best horse. Have it ready within the hour along with supplies for a day's ride." Then she snapped her door shut again. Content they would do as bid and Garland would be with her shortly, she headed back over to her window and watched the Mandaeor again. They would need to use tact and discretion here. Two things that came easily enough to the women of House Tyrell, but not so easily to the men, Mace in particular. She shifted slightly as her feet began to ache and glanced towards the rising sun. She'd write a reply to Willers later. No need to reply to the Mad Maid, Malara might not be the sanest of House Hightower, but she was no fool. She knew what she had discovered, and she would use her discretion to keep it safe. She grimaced as she heard the heavy thudding of feet on the staircase that led up to her solar, that told her that Garland was nearly at her solar door. He did not knock before he entered, something he had stopped doing ever since he had wed Leonette, and she could not help but scowl as the door slammed shut behind him. "You asked to see me, grandmother." She spun on the spot, lifting her head to gaze up at him. "I need you to ride out to Horn Hill. Leave immediately. Take Willa's best horse, it will have been saddled, and ride hard. You should be there by sundown tonight. Ask Randil Tali to return with you on the morrow." "Grandmother. It appears